Chapter 1098. Zhao Liangyu had been caught red-handed for acting first and reporting later. This was indeed a little embarrassing. Zhao Liangyu retreated step by step under Chu Xiu's oppressive gaze. However, he still straightened his neck and said, "Chu Xiu, you're a foreign elder of my Nine Phoenix Sword sect now, so you should naturally think for the sake of my Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Your actions have placed my sect in an unjust and dangerous situation. As a disciple of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, I can't just sit back and watch." Zhao Liangyu spoke with a strong sense of righteousness, but his figure had already involuntarily moved towards Lin Yazi. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "It's precisely because I'm a guest of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect that I have to care about some things. If a sect doesn't have rules, then it'll be a mess. No matter how wrong I am, it's not up to you to act first and report later to release him. I can tolerate you stomping your feet and clamoring in front of me, but the condition is that you don't cause trouble for me. I hate trouble, so when I encounter trouble, the last thing I can do is immediately resolve it." Lin Yazi could see that Chu Xiu's expression was a little off. Although he also knew that Zhao Liangyu had indeed been a little rash in this matter, Zhao Liangyu was still a disciple that he had taught for more than a decade. Lin Yazi hurriedly consoled him. "Brother Chu, this time it was Liangyu who didn't follow the rules. Don't worry, I'll definitely teach him well later." Before Lin Yazi could finish speaking, Chu Xiu lightly snapped his fingers. In an instant, the power of the blood demon power erupted, and the blood in Zhao Liangyu's entire body boiled. The blood demon power was so powerful and strange that Lin Yazi couldn't react at all. In the next moment, Zhao Liangyu's heart meridian was directly shattered by this powerful and boiling blood. He had let Wendong Lai go, but in the end he had died for Wendong Lai. Chu Xiu. Lin Yazi immediately looked at Chu Xiu in rage. Zhao Liangyu was a disciple that he had cultivated for more than a decade, and he had even treated him like half a son. In the end, Chu Xiu had actually killed him just like that, and he'd even done it right in front of him. Chu Xiu was simply fearless, so how could he not be furious? Chu Xiu said calmly, "Sect leader Lin Mengxinghe helped Cold River City rise in the past because he trusted me. But now you don't trust me. A disciple of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect openly went against me, yet you chose to side with him. Since it's like this, then where's the dignity of an honored guest like me? The reason why the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was able to enjoy such glory during this period of time was all because of me. If the Nine Phoenix Sword sect wants to continue enjoying its glory, then it can only advance and kill together with me. During this period of time, I've actually only killed 3 people to the outside world, and the remaining people were all killed by your Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Tell me, do they hate you more or hate me more? Sect leader Lin, don't be half-hearted. You can't turn back now." After saying all this, Chu Xiu directly turned around and left, leaving behind Lin Yazi with a dumbstruck expression and his entire body going cold. Only now did he recall that Zhao Liangyu had actually told him previously that this Chu Xiu wasn't someone easy to deal with, and that he was very dangerous, extremely dangerous. Previously, Chu Xiu's attitude towards him was still considered polite, but now he finally saw another side of Chu Xiu, a side that caused him to shudder with fear. He didn't dare to fall out with Chu Xiu, and he couldn't fall out with him. Just like Chu Xiu said, his Nine Phoenix Sword sect had enjoyed its glory during this period of time, and they'd killed enough people. So there was already no way back for his Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Up until this moment, a trace of slight regret finally appeared in Lin Yazi's heart. Was it right or wrong for him to find Chu Xiu to be an honored guest? Chu Xiu didn't care about how Lin Yazi thought in his heart. This time Zhao Liangyu had crossed his bottom line. In fact, Chu Xiu could have found another time to deal with him. Actually, he had insisted on killing Lin Yazi in front of him to give him a warning. Because during this period of time, he realized that Lin Yazi was also a little complacent. He seemed to have forgotten who gave him everything in the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. This wasn't a good thing, so Chu Xiu took this opportunity to remind him. To Chu Xiu, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was only a springboard, and the karma between the two had already been settled. He used the Nine Phoenix Sword sect to establish himself in the Dalu Ocean, and at the same time the Nine Phoenix Sword sect could obtain practical benefits. As for whether the Nine Phoenix Sword sect could become the next Cold River City, that would depend on themselves. Chu Xiu didn't have the time to play some sect-nurturing game in the Dalu Ocean. Zhao Liangyu's death actually didn't cause any ripples or impact in the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Zhao Liangyu, the eldest senior brother, didn't have high prestige in the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, and it wasn't even as high as Lin Fengwu's. For others, Chu Xiu, the guest elder, could bring them practical benefits, but Zhao Liangyu, the eldest senior brother, didn't bring them any practical benefits other than showing off. After Lin Fengwu heard the news, she didn't show any practical expression other than a deeper level of respect for Chu Xiu. After all, she was already a little impatient with Zhao Liangyu's pestering. But when she thought of what Chu Xiu had said to her before, Lin Fengwu still felt a chill. At this time in the Wind Smell Pavilion, the pavilion master, Wen Yongtai, was anxious and didn't know what to do. The Zhou family sent someone to pass on Chu Xiu's words to him, which almost made Wen Yongtai vomit blood in anger. He wanted nothing more than to kill his unlucky son. Although the Wind Smell Pavilion didn't claim to be an hemophilia, what they actually did was an hemophilia. In this line of work, although one had to keep talking, the most important thing was to control one's mouth and know what could be said and what could not be said. In the end, when Dong Lai specifically picked the things that could not be said, that mouth of his had already caused trouble more than once or twice. The last time he spread rumors about Lin Fengwu, although Lin Fengwu's reputation was damaged, it also caused the Wind Smell Pavilion's reputation to be criticized. It took a long time for them to recover. In the end, this brat actually caused trouble again. Just as when Dong Lai was thinking about how to deal with this matter, a disciple below reported that when Dong Lai had returned himself. Seeing Wen Dong Lai for the first time, Wen Yongtai scolded angrily, "You unfilial son, you actually have the nerve to come back. Why don't you just die in the Nine Phoenix Sword sect? I'll take it that I don't have a son like you." Although Wen Yongtai scolded him fiercely, Wen Dong Lai chuckled and said, "Dad, if you don't have a son like me, who will take over the Wind Smell Pavilion in the future?" Wen Yongtai snorted coldly and said, "If I hand over the family business to you, it will be ruined by your mouth sooner or later. How did you come back this time? Was it Lin Yazi who let you go?" Wen Yongtai shook his head and said, "It was Zhao Liangyu who let me go. He also told me that Chu Xiu is ruthless. Even if he let me go, he might not let the Wind Smell Pavilion off. Therefore, it's best if we ask the prefectural governor to come forward and suppress Chu Xiu." When Dong Lai scratched his head after hearing that. Actually, he didn't really want to come into contact with the prefectural governor. It should be said that no one in the martial arts world in Fanglin County wanted to come into contact with the prefectural governor. Once you entered the prefectural governor's office, you couldn't leave without taking out most of your family's assets. However, the Wind Smell Pavilion had already offended Primeval's successor. What else could he do but ask for the prefectural governor's help? The prefectural governor's character didn't seem to be easy to get along with. When Dong Lai said, "Father, are you worried that the Wind Smell Pavilion won't be able to handle such a large sum of resources?" When Yongtai snapped, "If it weren't for you, why would I have to spend so much money?" When Dong Lai rolled his eyes and said, "Father, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect is getting more and more overboard in Fanglin County with the support of Chu Xiu. If we don't stop them, I'm afraid they will really dominate the entire county. This isn't a matter that only concerns our Wind Scout Pavilion. Why don't we do this? Father, go to each family and tell them the pros and cons of the matter. Gather the resources and then bring these things to the county governor. Of course, it'll hurt to take out these resources individually, but if all the martial arts world forces in Fanglin County were to take them out together, that's not a big deal." When Yongtai looked at his son in surprise. He didn't expect his son, who was always ignorant and incompetent, to be so smart. Unfortunately, although being smart was useful, strength was the most important thing in the martial arts world. No matter how smart he was, it was useless in the face of strength. However, he didn't have time to think about it. When Dong Lai's suggestion was good. When Yongtai left on the same day to persuade all the martial arts world forces in Fanglin County. The Wind Smell Pavilion was in the business of anemophilia, so it had a good reputation. When Yongtai had personally spoken, and 90% of the forces in Fanglin County were willing to give a portion of their resources to Wen Yongtai. In the end, Wen Yongtai realized that the resources he had gathered were even more than he had expected. Wen Yongtai didn't delay and went straight to the prefectural governor's office in the Anzhou prefecture. The prefectural governor's office was in the center of the entire Anzhou prefecture. It didn't look like a mansion but more like a fortress built in the city. In fact, this place used to be a fortress that was used to defend against the ferocious beasts that covered the mountains and plains in the dense forest. When Yongtai waited in the city for a full quarter of an hour before a tall, dignified middle-aged man in bright yellow robes walked into the main hall. "I just woke up from my cultivation. I've made Pavilion Master Wen wait for a long time. Please forgive me." The middle-aged man said that, but his tone and attitude were high and mighty. He didn't seem to be forgiving at all. Instead, when Dong Lai stood up and said humbly, "What are you talking about, prefectural governor? I was the one who came down abruptly and disturbed you." The middle-aged man in front of him had an extraordinary identity. In the Imperial Sky Pavilion, he was a deacon elder named Jiangzong. Usually, the deacons in the Imperial Sky Pavilion were at the real pellet realm or the true fire spirit refinement realm. They weren't weak, but they were older and didn't have the chance to advance. Jiangzong was the same. He had never been treated as a core disciple. In the end, he broke through the deacon position and was specially appointed as an elder by the Imperial Sky Pavilion. This wasn't something ordinary people could do. Chapter 1099. As the prefectural governor of Fanglin County and the representative of the Imperial Sky Pavilion in Fanglin County, Jiangzong was impatient with the position. In the eyes of the smaller sects and clans, Jiangzong had the backing of a top sect in the eastern region, the Royal Sky Pavilion. He was the protector of a county and countless sects and forces were respectful to him. Therefore he should be doing well in the martial arts competition. However, Jiangzong could not wait to return to the Imperial Sky Pavilion to cultivate. Experts could only improve faster when they were together. Although Jiangzong was not a core disciple of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, he was ambitious. In the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the resources could not be compared to being a tyrant here. However, he could receive guidance from a martial immortal and the atmosphere was different. He was not considered old and had not given up on the ambition of advancing further. Therefore, although Jiangzong was impatient with the forces from Fanglin County bothering him all the time, he would still step in to solve the problem in time. This was because it could bring him a large amount of resources. When he presented the resources every year, the Imperial Sky Pavilion would naturally remember his contributions. When he had accumulated enough credits, he would be able to apply for a transfer to the Imperial Sky Pavilion from his superiors. In fact, Jiangzong criticized the rules of the Imperial Sky Pavilion in his heart. Why did the prefectural governor have to be a heaven and earth enlightenment realm expert? With the influence of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, who would dare to rebel even if they sent a real pellet realm expert? It was such a waste. After all, he had been in this position for more than a decade and had never encountered any troublesome problems. Pavilion Master Wen, are you in trouble this time? Wen Yongtai immediately put on an aggrieved expression and said, Prefectural Governor, the 9 Phoenix Sword sect is too much. Lin Yazi accidentally found a primeval lord's successor and joined forces with him to dominate the martial arts world of Fanglin County. The Changhe sect and the other 2 forces have already fallen into their hands. Now they are bullying the martial arts forces of Fanglin County even more. If this goes on, I'm afraid they will be more powerful than you, prefectural governor. Jiangzong did not care about Wen Yongtai's provocation. He represented the Imperial Sky Pavilion. No matter how much trouble they caused, even if they dominated the entire Fanglin County, they would still have to listen to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's orders and offer offerings. Hence, as long as they maintained their respect, Jiangzong would not care even if they destroyed their families. What piqued his interest was the fact that the other party was Gu Zun's successor. Over the years, quite a number of Gu Zun's descendants had come out to train, but there were also people who used the name of Gu Zun's descendants to swindle people. Ancient sovereign's successor? To be able to encounter the 9 Phoenix Sword sect so coincidentally, could he be a scammer? Which primordial sovereign's successor is he? When Yongtai shook his head and said, I don't know about this. It seems that even Lin Yazi doesn't know. However, his strength and age are very similar to Gu Zun's successor. Aside from them, no one else in the outside world can raise such outstanding young experts. Jiangzong rubbed his chin and said, Interesting, does the 9 Phoenix Sword sect want to become Cold River City? Seeing that Jiangzong did not reply for a long time, Wen Yongtai secretly cursed at his insatiable greed. However, he obediently handed over a secret space box and said, Lord Prefectural Governor, this is just a small gift. Please come forward and restore peace to Fanglin County. Jiangzong did not stand on ceremony and took the secret space box directly. He laughed and said, Don't worry, the sky of Fanglin County is still in the hands of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. No one else can touch it or take it away. In the 9 Phoenix Sword sect's secret seclusion chamber, Chu Xiu was trying to connect with heaven and earth to control this power. During this time, Chu Xiu was not only checking the information and records of the sects, but he also did not give up on cultivating. It had to be said that the Daluotian environment was too good, so good that it somewhat exceeded Chu Xiu's expectations. This place was even closer to the sky. When he was in the lower realm, Chu Xiu had gone into seclusion for a long time to find the bottleneck of the heaven and earth illumination realm. In the end, apart from condensing his power a little, he did not find anything. But in this place, Chu Xiu was able to grasp a hazy rhythm. Although it wasn't very clear, at least he had a general idea of what it was. Compared to the lower realm, this place was indeed heaven, a heaven for cultivators. At this moment, Lin Fengwu hurriedly ran over and knocked on the door, shouting in a low voice, "Senior Chu, bad news. The prefectural governor is here." Chu Xiu opened the door and raised his eyebrows. "Oh, he's quite fast." The last time he heard Lin Fengwu talk about the prefectural governor, he knew that he would have to deal with him sooner or later. He had caused such a huge commotion in Fanglin County that the prefectural governor, as the ruler of Fanglin County, could not ignore it. However, Chu Xiu did not expect the prefectural governor to come so quickly. In the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect's guest hall, Lin Yazi was respectfully receiving Jiangzong. His attitude could even be considered humble. Compared to the lower realm, the Daluotian's rules were much stricter. In the sphere of influence controlled by the top sects, no voices of disobedience were allowed. When Chu Xiu walked into the guest hall and saw the prefectural governor, he also sighed in his heart. He had seen many heaven and earth illumination realm powerhouses in the lower realm, and Shang Tianliang had even fought for him. However, those heaven and earth illumination realm existences in the lower realm were all supreme-level figures, but in the Daluotian they could only be a prefectural governor. This difference was a little too big. Of course, this was only from Chu Xiu's perspective. In the eyes of Lin Yazi and the others, the prefectural governor was also an incredible big shot. When he saw Chu Xiu, Lin Yazi hurriedly introduced him. "This is the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect's foreign delegate, young Master Chu Xiu, Guzun's successor. This is the Imperial Sky Pavilion's managing elder and Fanglin County's prefectural governor, Lord Jiangzong." When Jiangzong introduced himself to others, he would always say that he was the Imperial Sky Pavilion's managing elder first before saying that he was the prefectural governor of Fanglin County. Everyone in Fanglin County knew this, so they would introduce him that way. "So it's the prefectural governor. I was cultivating earlier and couldn't make it in time. My apologies for not being able to make it in time." Chu Xiu cupped his fists casually. Jiangzong nodded casually and suddenly asked, "You said that you're Guzun's successor. May I know who your master is?" Jiangzong's tone was interrogative, causing Chu Xiu to be slightly taken aback. It seemed like he had overestimated his identity as Guzun's successor. It seemed like Jiangzong didn't buy it. At the moment, in Jiangzong's eyes, Chu Xiu's identity as Guzun's successor was not even certain. Moreover, even if Chu Xiu was the real deal, there was no need for him to be too respectful because he was not afraid of Chu Xiu. The major Daluotian factions did not want to provoke Guzun's lineage because Guzun was only focused on the pinnacle of martial arts and had no conflict of interest with them. Therefore they would not provoke them if they could, but that did not mean that they were afraid of them. No matter how strong Guzun was, he only had a single successor and only had one expert. However, the Imperial Sky Pavilion was one of the top factions in the eastern region. They had more than one expert and their influence was not something Guzun could compare to. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "My apologies, my lineage was once defeated in a battle. From then on, my lineage will not reveal its name until we defeat our enemy or his successor." In truth, Chu Xiu had read many ancient records in the lower realm and knew the names of some of the ancient experts, but he did not dare to speak blindly. He could say that he was a Guzun's successor, but he did not know if those warriors with names in the records had become Guzun or if their inheritance had been passed down to the present. Therefore he came up with this excuse and gave himself a reason to search for clues about Dugu Weiwei. He believed that, given Dugu Weiwei's personality, the Daluotian would not be peaceful if he came to the Daluotian continent. He must have fought with many people and perhaps one of them was a Guzun. As for the origin of his cultivation art, it was even easier to explain. As long as it was a cultivation art that belonged to Dugu Weiwei, it must have been comprehended by the ancestor of his lineage when he fought against Dugu Weiwei with his life on the line. Know yourself and know your enemy and you will never be defeated. If you want to defeat your opponent, you must first understand your opponent's cultivation art. This is very normal. Jiangzong snorted and said, "Inconvenient to reveal? Very well, I'm not interested in knowing. However, you must restrain yourself from what you did in Fanglin Prefecture. Only the prefectural governor's office can collect tributes from the major sections. No one else has the right. And the Wind Sense Pavilion, the child said the wrong thing and has been taught a lesson. Let's forget about this matter." Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "What do you mean, prefectural governor? Although I led the 9 Phoenix Sword sect to attack Fanglin Prefecture, I did not violate the Imperial Sky Pavilion's rules, did I? No matter how many sects I destroyed, the tributes I paid to the prefectural governor's office were not reduced at all. Now that you want me to restrain myself, what about the expenditure I expended previously? What about the disciples of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect who died when they attacked and occupied the mountain gate? Jiangzong stared at Chu Xiu and a faint coercion emerged from his body. I don't care how you calculate it. All you need to know is that in Fanglin Prefecture, my words are the rules. It doesn't matter if you're the real or fake successor of the ancient Venerate. As long as you're in Fanglin Prefecture, you must abide by my rules. Lin Yazi, who was standing at the side, kept shooting looks at Chu Xiu's envoy, telling him to quickly submit. Only then did he realize that Chu Xiu was a little stubborn. In terms of strength, the other party was a heaven and earth mystic illumination realm expert. In terms of background, the other party had the Imperial Sky Pavilion behind him. He might not necessarily be afraid of his master. What else could he do other than submit at a time like this? However, Chu Xiu taught Lin Yazi a lesson. Sometimes, the more you back down, the more the other party would take advantage of you. Chu Xiu had given Jiangzong a lot of face earlier. In Fanglin Prefecture, he was willing to act within the Imperial Sky Pavilion's rules. Unfortunately, there was someone who did not want to abide by the rules. Since they could not be reasoned with, he could only resort to violence. Chapter 1100. Chu Xiu was a man who could endure silently, but at the same time he was not willing to endure silently. If one had the strength, who would be willing to lower their heads and lie low? Moreover, Chu Xiu was a man who would climb on someone's nose. Back then he had borrowed Zhong Xinxiu's promise and dared to fool Jun Wuxian and the entire orthodox martial arts world. Now, even though he had come to the Daluotian continent and arrived in a foreign world, Chu Xiu still had the guts to not back down because of his illusory identity as the successor of a supreme. Moreover, he could see from Jiangzong's eyes that this prefectural governor was not that resolute. Taking a step forward, Chu Xiu said calmly, "Are the words of the prefectural governor the rules? Doesn't that mean that the prefectural governor thinks that you are more powerful than the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion? Why, after being a local tyrant for so long, do you think that you are the real emperor?" Lin Yazi's expression changed when he heard these sarcastic words. This was going to offend the prefectural governor to death. Jiangzong's face was filled with rage as he shouted, "How dare you!" As Jiangzong's voice fell, a small sword appeared from his sleeve. In the next moment, the small sword disappeared and appeared in front of Chu Xiu almost instantaneously. There was no strong fluctuation of heaven and earth essence qi, nor was there any explosion of stellar qi. However, this small sword was extremely dangerous. If it was anyone else, they would have been pierced through by this sword. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu seemed to have predicted this. The moment Jiangzong made his move, he had already opened his hand and grasped the small sword in his hand. Previously, when Chu Xiu was fighting against the head-piercing 7 arrows, he had tried to push the heaven's sun gazing at air to its peak. Although Chu Xiu had not ignited his primordial spirit and was unable to reach the peak of the heaven's sun gazing at air, he had still reached that realm. Therefore, his understanding of the heaven's sun gazing at air had improved. Jiangzong's small sword was not much bigger than the dagger chief. It looked small and exquisite, but it was a genuine divine weapon. But now, Chu Xiu's fleshly body had already reached the pinnacle. The internal true fire and the world-extinguishing flame burned at the same time. The gold-and-silver internal true fire burned the small sword, causing it to turn red. The apocalyptic flame followed the small sword and headed straight for Jiangzong. Jiangzong snorted coldly and immediately sheathed his sword. Stars revolved around him as he stood in front of the apocalyptic fire. In the next moment, Jiangzong pointed out with 4 fingers on his right hand. Earth, wind, water, and fire, the 4 extreme powers condensed into a single point and gathered in his 4 fingers. The power was so concentrated that it was only the size of a bean, but it caused the surrounding space to tremble. Even Lin Yazi was shocked by the power. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. At this moment he didn't feel any pressure. Instead he felt a little strange. When he fought with Fang Changhe and the others, he felt that the Daluotian warriors of the same level were too weak. They were far weaker than the warriors of the same level in the lower realm. Jiangzong's strength wasn't that strong. In fact, Chu Xiu didn't feel as much pressure as he did when he fought with Ling Yunzi. Of course, this wasn't because Jiangzong was too weak. It was because the current Chu Xiu was much stronger than the Chu Xiu when he fought with Ling Yunzi at the peak of Kunlun Mountain. At this moment, Chu Xiu felt that Jiangzong's strength wasn't too shocking. However, his understanding of the martial way and the various strange changes in the rules of power were completely different from the martial way in the lower realm. In the past 10,000 years, the inheritance of the ancient martial way and the martial way in the lower realm had been severed. Both sides shared the same origin, but in terms of the details they had walked two different paths. In the face of Jiangzong's attack, Chu Xiu formed a seal with his hands. It was the colorless sealing palm seal. However, the colorless sealing palm seal that Chu Xiu formed this time was very small. It was only a foot long and the space around it was distorted. However, it was devouring all the energy around it, including the force of Jiangzong's 4 fingers. Lin Yazi even had a feeling that if Chu Xiu changed the direction of this seal technique, his entire 9 Phoenix Sword sect would be dragged into it. The colorless sealing palm seal was like a Mount Sumeru in a mustard seed. At this moment, Chu Xiu had used the true essence of this seal technique and pushed it to a peak. A peak that even its creator, Holy Monk Tan Yuan, had never reached. Jiangzong couldn't help but frown when he saw that Chu Xiu had blocked his attack. In the next moment, the back of his head glowed with a golden light and the power of his primordial spirit transformed into a divine shadow. It formed a seal with its hands and charged at Chu Xiu. This was a primordial spirit secret technique. The power of his primordial spirit in Chu Xiu's mind also flourished. He didn't even use the power of his inner demons. Instead, he directly transformed the power of his primordial spirit into the appearance of the great Mahakala. His primordial spirit fire bloomed from his third eye and tangled with the great Mahakala. Jiangzong suddenly retracted his primordial spirit fire and looked at Chu Xiu in shock. The great Mahakala of the Sanskrit sect. Who are you? Jiangzong hadn't recognized the apocalyptic fire before. The Sanskrit sect was located far away in the western regions and rarely came to the eastern regions. Therefore he had never fought with the Sanskrit sect's martial artists. However, the great Mahakala that the Sanskrit sect worshipped was very famous. It was impossible for him not to know about it. Chu Xiu said lightly, "One of my ancestors had some friendship with the leader of the Sanskrit sect's great Mahakala palace. Is there anything strange about that?" Jiangzong didn't say anything, nor did he continue to attack. He only stared at Chu Xiu for a long time before he laughed heartily. "Gu Zun's successor, you live up to your reputation. You may have the strength to break my rules, but if you dare to violate the Imperial Sky Pavilion's rules, I won't be the next person to come here." After saying that, Jiangzong turned around and left. Lin Yazi looked at all of this with a dumbfounded expression, unable to react. Just now, Jiangzong had angrily thought that Chu Xiu had challenged his dignity. Why was he letting it go now? He didn't seem to have lost. "What's going on?" Chu Xiu said lightly, "Do you think the prefectural governor is an idiot?" Lin Yazi hurriedly shook his head and said, "Of course not. The Imperial Sky Pavilion has witnessed the prefectural governor's abilities. I heard that among the counties that the Imperial Sky Pavilion controls, the prefectural governor is also the most outstanding. Since the prefectural governor isn't an idiot, why would he fight to the death with someone that he doesn't have 100% confidence in taking down? Just for the little things that the other sects have offered him? Isn't he a little too worthless?" Chu Xiu had sensed from the beginning that although the prefectural governor seemed overbearing, he had been testing him all along to find out his true identity and strength. Earlier on, they had exchanged 3 blows and had suppressed their powers to the limit. They didn't even break a single tile. It was clear that they both understood each other's intentions. If he could easily tell that Chu Xiu was an imposter, or if Chu Xiu gave in slightly, Chu Xiu would probably be at Jiangzong's mercy. After testing the waters, he realized that Chu Xiu wasn't that easy to deal with. Naturally, he wouldn't force his way through. What was dignity? All Jiangzong wanted was practical benefits. He would be able to return to the Imperial Sky Pavilion after a while. There was no need for him to fight to the death with a fellow of unknown origin. Therefore, as long as Chu Xiu didn't touch his reverse scale and violate the Imperial Sky Pavilion's rules, he wouldn't really fight to the death with Chu Xiu. After Jiangzong left the 9 Phoenix Sword sect, when Yong Tai, who had been waiting outside for news from Jiangzong, immediately rushed up to him and asked, "Prefectural Governor, what's the situation inside? Is Chu Xiu real or fake?" Jiangzong patted his shoulder and said calmly, "Go back and pack up. Send over the things that Chu Xiu wants. If you admit defeat, he probably won't annihilate the entire Wind Surveillance Pavilion." When Yong Tai was stunned. "Even you, Prefectural Governor, can't defeat Chu Xiu. What cultivation realm is he at?" Jiangzong scoffed. "What nonsense are you talking about? What do you mean by I can't defeat Chu Xiu? I didn't lose either." When Yong Tai thought to himself, "I didn't lose. Doesn't that mean I didn't win?" However, when Yong Tai didn't dare to say this out loud. He only asked cautiously, In that case, can you return the things that I brought over to you earlier, prefectural governor? Jiangzong glanced at Wen Yongtai from the corner of his eye and didn't say anything. However, the intense look in his eyes scared Wen Yongtai so much that he immediately turned around and left without saying another word. Looking at Wen Yongtai's back, Jiangzong smirked. You want to take back the things that are already in my pocket? How naive. Jiangzong rubbed his chin and pondered for a moment. He had to report this matter to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Otherwise he would have to bear the consequences if trouble arose. Actually, whether it was the Imperial Sky Pavilion or the other Daluotian sects, they didn't view Gu Xun's successor as an enemy. Instead they treated him with indifference. However, the prerequisite was that Gu Xun's successor did not go overboard. He could enter the underworld, but if he messed up the order of the underworld, someone would have to intervene. Chu Xiu was definitely not a kind person. Moreover, Jiangzong couldn't figure out his opponent's background from the few probing moves they exchanged just now. He was certain that apart from Gu Xun's successor, only a top-notch genius nurtured by the various sects could possess such combat strength at the spirit refinement realm. In any case, regardless of Chu Xiu's identity, it wouldn't affect Jiangzong's merit if he reported the situation and got into trouble. As for Wen Yongtai, he didn't play any tricks when he returned to the Wind Smell Pavilion. He directly beat up Wen Donglai and packed up all the books in the Wind Smell Pavilion and handed them over to Chu Xiu. He was truly afraid. Jiangzong, the prefectural governor, had stayed in Fanglin Prefecture for more than a decade. He was experienced and well-versed in his methods. Although he rarely fought, he managed to keep the martial arts forces in Fanglin Prefecture in line. What else could he do now that Jiangzong couldn't do anything to Chu Xiu? Although he felt the pinch, he didn't want to follow in the footsteps of the Changhe sect and the others. Chu Xiu didn't expect Wen Yongtai to be so tactful and not make him waste any more time. After getting what he wanted, Chu Xiu couldn't be bothered to find trouble with Wen Yongtai. He immediately began to check the records of the Wind Smell Pavilion. He was pleasantly surprised to find the information he wanted in the records of the Wind Smell Pavilion. Chapter 1101. Although the Wind Detection Pavilion claimed that they were not anemophilia, in reality, what they were doing was anemophilia's work. The things recorded by anemophilia were very different from the things recorded by other sections. Ordinary sects would record some things, but they would only record things that were related to them. The things recorded by anemophilia, on the other hand, would be anything that they saw or heard. They might need it in the future. Even with Chu Xiu's mental energy, he felt dizzy after looking at the huge pile of things in the Wind Detection Pavilion for several days. However, he finally found some useful clues. According to the Wind Detection Pavilion's records, there was a huge earthquake in the Diluo Mountains more than 500 years ago. The area near Fanglin County was shrouded by a powerful force, and almost no one dared to enter. However, before the people could investigate, the eastern region's major sects, the Imperial Sky Pavilion High Heaven sect, and other sects made their move and headed to the Diluo Mountains. The martial arts world forces in Fanglin County could be said to be quite obedient. Under the Imperial Sky Pavilion's order, no one dared to take a step into the Diluo Mountains. The next day the wave of energy disappeared and moved north. The Imperial Sky Pavilion only lifted the ban. When the others entered the Diluo Mountains again to investigate, they did not find anything. However, the part of the Diluo Mountains near Fanglin County no longer had any ferocious beasts or the like since then. Some wild beasts even avoided that area. Because the incident happened out of the blue, the Wind Detection Pavilion only gave a brief introduction. They even noted that it was the birth of a precious treasure. When the people from the lower realm came to the Daluotian country 10,000 years ago, the Daluotian country was still undeveloped. There were ferocious beasts and all kinds of strange dangers everywhere. However, even though it was strange and dangerous, there were also many opportunities along the way. Even after 10,000 years, some precious treasures in arcane realms would still appear in the world. It was unlike the lower realm, where people could only find some ancient relics and eat leftovers. The incident this time attracted so many major sects, so it was normal that people thought it was the birth of a precious treasure. Chu Xiu knocked on the table. It seemed that he still had to go back to the Diluo Mountains to have a look. Even though Chu Xiu had come to the celestial exalted plane through the spatial rift created by Dugu Weiwa and Ning Xuanji, no one could say for sure what was going on in space. Only heaven knew if the place he came from was the same as the place Dugu Weiwa and the others came out from. Moreover, if Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji were besieged by the Daluotian people as soon as they came out, they must have searched through the place. Even if there was anything useful, it should have been taken away. However, Chu Xiu was still worried and wanted to take a look himself. Others might not be able to discover it, but that didn't mean that Chu Xiu couldn't. The close relationship between him and Dugu Weiwei had already been proven countless times in the past. For example, in the space where Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji fought, only Chu Xiu could borrow Dugu Weiwei's power. Lu Changlu, the sect leader of the true martial sect, couldn't borrow Ning Xuanji's power. This time, Chu Xiu didn't let the 9 Phoenix Sword sect accompany him to the Dilua Mountains. If he encountered something this time, it would be difficult to explain with so many people. The 9 Phoenix Sword sect thought that Chu Xiu wanted to leave. Lin Yazi could be said to be shouting bitterly to stop Chu Xiu. Now that the 9 Phoenix Sword sect had offended almost all the martial arts forces in Fanglin County, they were mighty with Chu Xiu around. If Chu Xiu wasn't around, they would be besieged from all sides. It wasn't until Chu Xiu promised Lin Yazi several times that he didn't plan to leave that Lin Yazi let Chu Xiu leave skeptically. Chu Xiu had been to the place where the Dilua Mountains had been previously sealed. When he and Lin Fengwu left the Dilua Mountains, they passed by this place. However, they were in a hurry at that time, so Chu Xiu didn't know about this, so he didn't check it carefully. This place was a nameless town. Previously, there were some fierce beasts and other things in the Dilua Mountains, so the martial artists who came to the Dilua Mountains to hunt fierce beasts would camp here. After the energy fluctuation 500 years ago, it was difficult to see even wild beasts in the entire Dilua Mountains, so this town was completely deserted. Only some ordinary people who relied on collecting herbs for a living gathered here. After all, even wild beasts were rarely seen in this area. As long as they were in good health, ordinary people who had learned some martial arts could come and go here. Chu Xiu followed the town and entered the Dilua Mountains. He released all the energy in his body and raised the heaven's sun, gazing at air to the extreme, feeling the remaining energy in the Dilua Mountains. However, the result was a little disappointing for Chu Xiu. There was nothing unusual here. Perhaps after 500 years, even if there was any energy left, it would have dissipated. At this moment, Chu Xiu suddenly raised his head and said coldly, "Sneaky, sneaky, what are you looking at?" As soon as Chu Xiu's voice fell, a young man dressed in luxurious clothes appeared behind him. He had the cultivation of the true fire spirit refinement state, but under Chu Xiu's sun gazing at air, he could feel an indescribable aura exuding from him. It was even more terrifying than Jiangzong, who was in the heaven and earth elemental enlightenment state. The young man smiled and said, "Friend, you're being unreasonable. The Dilua Mountains are not owned by your family. How can I be sneaky and sneaky just by standing here?" The young man's appearance could be considered decent, but his expression was a little shifty. He had a funny little mustache which gave people a very indecent feeling. "You've been following me since I entered the Dilua Mountains. Is this a coincidence? Where are you from? Who are you going to avenge?" Although Chu Xiu had not been in the Daluo heaven for a long time, he was still considered to be very talented. In such a short period of time, he had offended the people of an entire county and killed a lot of people. It would not be surprising if someone came looking for trouble with him or wanted to seek revenge. The young man chuckled and pointed to the sky. "Which way?" "The path to heaven. I'm Lu Sanjin, the Eastern Region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Greetings, Brother Chu." Chu Xiu's eyes narrowed when he heard that. This seemingly indecent young man had a powerful background. He was even more powerful than Jiangzong. Chu Xiu might not be familiar with the other Daluotian sects, but Fanglin County was under the jurisdiction of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Almost all the ancient records of the major forces had descriptions of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so it could be said that they were very clear. The Eastern Region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion represented the face of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. There was only one person in every generation, and they were all disciples with outstanding potential. They roamed the Eastern Region and monitored the counties under the jurisdiction of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, such as if there were any incidents in their territories and the prefectural governor's actions. Therefore, although a prefectural governor like Jiangzong was very powerful, he still had to be polite to him. Otherwise, he would feel very uncomfortable if Jiangzong reported him to his superiors. Now that the Eastern Region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was looking for him, it was probably because of what he had done in Fanglin County that Jiangzong had reported him to his superiors. "It's indeed a path to heaven. May I know why you're looking for me, Brother Lu?" Lu Sanjin squinted his small eyes and said, "It's nothing much, I'm just curious. Jiangzong said that a prime venerate's inheritance has come to Fanglin County. As the Eastern Region wayfarer, of course I can't ignore it, so I came to pay a visit. May I know who your master is, Brother Chu? You might even be friends with the ancestors of the Imperial Sky Pavilion." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, I've already told Zong that it's not convenient to reveal my master's inheritance before I defeat my opponent. Lu Sanjin chuckled and said, Is it not convenient to reveal it or you can't reveal it? Ever since Meng Xinghe helped Cold River City become one of the top Daluotian sects, the low-profile Prime Venerate's successor has become famous. Although it's a good story, it has also attracted many swindlers who pretend to be the Prime Venerate's successor with evil intentions. Chu Xiu said coldly, Are you saying that I'm an imposter? Lu Sanjin took a step forward and said, Brother Chu, if you're not an imposter, then tell me your master's inheritance. Chu Xiu was already clenching the formation-breaking sword in his hand. He said calmly, Do you think I'll tell you just because you want me to? If you suspect that I'm an imposter, then find evidence to prove that I'm an imposter. Do you expect me to produce evidence to prove that I'm not the reincarnation of some evil god? It's not the behavior of a gentleman to be secretive. Lu Sanjin's small eyes glowed with a golden light, and a mystical rhythm surged around him. A murderous intent flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes. He had thought that the matter would be resolved after he forced Zong to retreat. He didn't expect Zong to be so cautious despite his domineering appearance. He was afraid that something might happen to Chu Xiu, so he pushed him to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. The Imperial Sky Pavilion wouldn't have sent someone to Fonglin County just for such a small matter. However, Lu Sanjin, the Eastern Region advisor, happened to be in the vicinity of Fonglin County. Hence, the Imperial Sky Pavilion sent him along. Although Lu Sanjin seemed like a frivolous person, he was the most serious among the disciples in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. If it really didn't work, Chu Xiu would have to kill him and escape to another place. The biggest difference between the Daluotian and the lower realm was that the experts from the major sects were very territorial. They wouldn't simply head to another sect's territory. Just when both sides were ready to fight, the sound of chanting scriptures with Taoist connotation suddenly rang out. The voice was clear and it made one feel at ease. Deep in the Diluo Mountains, a young Taoist was riding a snow-white donkey. He was reading a scripture leisurely. When he saw Lu Sanjin and Chu Xiu standing in front of him, a bright smile appeared on his face. Brother Lu from the Imperial Sky Pavilion? What a coincidence. I didn't expect to meet you here. Brother, you look unfamiliar. I'm Yin Lingzi from the Spiritual Treasure Temple. Nice to meet you. Chapter 1102. As soon as the young Taoist named Yin Lingzi appeared, he attracted the attention of Chu Xiu and Lu Sanjin. Chu Xiu had only met one person who was able to vividly display the Taoist nature and the word freedom. The Taoist martial artists in the mortal world, whether it was Ling Yunzi or Lu Changlu who were at the mysterious enlightenment realm, had been contaminated by the world of mortals and lost their temperament. Although the old Taoist master was open-minded, he had a strong sense of the world of mortals. It was a kind of temperament that was dyed by living in the world of mortals for a lifetime. As for Zhang Qingjin, he was a stubborn person. If he did not give up on his goal, he would not be able to live a carefree life for the rest of his life. However, this young Taoist was riding on a donkey as if the Taoist scripture in his hand was the only thing in the world. Lu Sanjin also restrained his momentum. He cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said calmly, Brother Yin Lingzi of the Lingbao Temple. I heard that you are traveling around the world. After I settle the matter in front of me, you must come to the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest. Although Lu Sanjin looked a little frivolous on the surface, he was actually an exceptionally arrogant person. He had entered the true fire spiritual cultivation realm before the age of 30, became the Eastern Region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, and schemed against a local tyrant like Zhang. His ability and strength were extraordinary. There were only a few martial artists at the same level as him in the Daluotian world who could win his respect. Yin Lingzi was one of them. Yin Lingzi was born with Taoist connotation, and his Taoist heart was not afraid of any inner demons. His talent even attracted the current Taoist master of the Three Pristines Temple to ask him to be his disciple. The Taoist master promised that as long as Yin Lingzi agreed, he would be the next Taoist master. The entire Three Pristines Temple would use all its resources to cultivate Yin Lingzi. However, Yin Lingzi refused such a generous offer, and the reason was very funny. It was because the vegetarian food in the Lingbao Temple was very delicious and he could not bear to leave. If others said this, they would definitely think that they were deliberately teasing the Taoist master. However, Yin Lingzi said it sincerely. In the end, the Taoist master of the Three Pristines Temple could only sigh and leave, which shocked all the Daluotian people. Because of this, Lu Sanjin greatly admired Yin Lingzi. Although the Spiritual Treasure Temple was also a large Taoist sect, and its disciples all possessed astonishing battle prowess, and there were even people of the martial immortal level among them. There was still a certain gap between them and the true peak sections. They could only be considered half a peak sect. At the very least, they could not be compared to the Three Pristines Palace, the supreme Taoist sect. If Lu Sanjin were to receive such a promise, he could not guarantee that he would still be loyal to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. At this moment, Chu Xiu was looking at Yin Lingzi as memories flashed through his mind. He was extremely familiar with the words spiritual treasure temple. After a while, Chu Xiu said with a bright smile, "So it's brother Yin Lingzi. I am Chu Xiu. I did not expect to meet an old friend of the spiritual treasure temple when I left the mountain this time. My master once said that my ancestor was very close to the spiritual treasure temple. He even stayed in the spiritual treasure temple for a long time before the great ancient era. However, after entering the Daluotian continent, my ancestor became infatuated with martial arts, so he went into seclusion after handing over his inheritance. I did not expect that he would go into seclusion for the rest of his life. I did not expect that we would never meet again." Yin Lingzi's face was also filled with surprise. He said, "Oh, Brother Chu, who is your ancestor? I might have heard of him before. It is fate that the descendants of an old friend can meet again." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. Due to certain reasons, I can't reveal the name of the ancestor of my lineage for now. I have to wait until I defeat the successor of a great enemy and completely wipe away the humiliation before I can reveal my name to the outside world. However, my master once said that before the great calamity of the ancient times, my ancestral master used to live in the Spirit Treasure Temple when he was young. He was fortunate enough to be taught martial arts by the temple master of the Spirit Treasure Temple, Immortal Crimson Afterglow. Reverend Crimson Afterglow was an expert closest to becoming a martial immortal. However, before the great ancient era, he died trying to save the common people. It was truly a pity. There was also Senior Ling Qingzi from the Spiritual Treasure Temple. Back then, he was the eldest senior of the Spiritual Treasure Temple. No matter in terms of strength or character, he was truly admirable. Even my ancestor admired him greatly. My ancestor once said that there were many geniuses in the Spiritual Treasure Temple. He did not record their names and only referred to them by their seniority. At that time, although the second senior of the Spiritual Treasure Temple seemed frivolous, he was extremely talented. The third senior did not like martial arts, but he was extremely talented in formations. Although the fourth senior was a Taoist, he liked to eat meat. The fifth senior liked to drink wine. Even Uncle Chui Wen's cooking was delicious. These people were all good friends of my ancestor. However, all of them died in the great ancient era. They died trying to save people. Only Senior Ling Qingzi and the youngest junior survived. My ancestor once said that although the Spiritual Treasure Temple was not a great sect, its breadth of mind was even greater than that of the great sections. It was truly praiseworthy. Chu Xiu had seen many of the stories of the Spiritual Treasure Temple in the Xiaofen Heaven and the Six Illusory Realms. It was enough for him to fill in the details of the Spiritual Treasure Temple in the past. Lu Sanjin, who was standing at the side, was dumbfounded. Part of what Chu Xiu said was true. The entire Daluotian knew about it. However, he did not know most of it. The Spiritual Treasure Temple was very famous among the Daluotian sections. It had the least number of people. In the past 10,000 years, including the chefs in the kitchen, there had never been more than 2 digits of people. However, the disciples of the Spiritual Treasure Temple were not inferior to those of the top sections. Almost all of them were the best among their peers. When the light of the spiritual treasure appeared, who could compete with them? In Lu Sanjin's memory, the most famous people of the Spiritual Treasure Temple were the first 2 generations of sect masters, Lord Qingyun Ling Qingzi and his junior, Lord Purple Sun, Su Fenghua. Lord Purple Sun did not have a Taoist name because his master did not have time to give him one. He only used his secular name. A sect with 2 Dao masters and 2 martial immortals. After entering the Daluotian world, the Spiritual Treasure Temple only relied on these 2 people to rise again. At the peak of their glory, these 2 people were not inferior to the top sections. They were very famous. Although the Spiritual Treasure Temple could not produce a martial immortal in every generation due to the number of people, it did not hurt their reputation. Moreover, Lu Sanjin had heard that during the great ancient calamity, the master of these 2 people was also an expert who had the qualifications to step into the martial immortal realm. Unfortunately, he did not make it to the Daluotian and died. That person must be the Reverend Crimson Afterglow that Chu Xiu mentioned. This Reverend Crimson Afterglow only existed in legends. Apart from people mentioning it at the beginning, Lu Sanjin could guarantee that after 10,000 years, There were not many Daluotian martial artists who had heard of this name. Only the disciples of big sects like the Imperial Sky Pavilion would know of him. Lu Sanjin looked at Chu Xiu suspiciously. This suspicious guy said it as if it was the truth. Could it be that he was really the descendant of the ancient venerables? At this moment Yin Lingzi became excited after listening to Chu Xiu. Brother Chu's ancestral master even knows this. He must be someone who is very close to the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple. If master and the others know that there is an old friend in the spiritual treasure temple, they will be very happy. Lu Sanjin looked at Yin Lingzi and said, "What he said, is it true?" Yin Lingzi nodded and said, "Of course it is true. Back then, the two ancestral masters, Qingyun and Xiang, said that the reason they could come to the Daluotian world in exchange for a chance of survival was because Ancestral Master Crimson Afterglow and the other ancestral masters exchanged their lives. Therefore, there will always be their memorial tablets in the spiritual treasure temple. The disciples of the temple will never forget them. Moreover, Ancestral Master Xiang has the habit of keeping a diary. I have read many of his diary memories before the great ancient calamity. The character and preferences of those ancestral masters are exactly the same as what Brother Chu said. These things may not even be known by the disciples of the spiritual treasure temple. Since Brother Chu is able to explain it in such detail, it seems that the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple must have a very close relationship with the spiritual treasure temple." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "It can be said that it is very close. The ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple is a Taoist, Buddhist and demon cultivator. In the past, Ancestral Master Crimson Afterglow did not have any sectarian bias and taught the ancestral master of the spiritual treasure temple many things. This kindness my faction will never forget." Seeing that Yin Lingzi and Chu Xiu were chatting happily, Lu Sanjin started to feel awkward. Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi seemed to be talking about the same things. He would suspect Chu Xiu but he would not suspect Yin Lingzi. Therefore this seemingly suspicious guy turned out to be the real ancestral master. Lu Sanjin rubbed his hands and said, "I did not expect Brother Chu to be the descendant of Guzun. Please forgive me for my ignorance, I almost misunderstood Brother Chu." Although he was embarrassed, he was still thick-skinned. Although he was not afraid of Chu Xiu, it was not a good thing to offend a descendant of Guzun for no reason. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Do I look like a swindler with my suspicious appearance?" Lu Sanjin laughed and said, "You can't blame me for this. It was Jiang Zong who said it so mysteriously. Brother Chu, don't worry, I will teach that old man a lesson later." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows slightly. This guy really did not take Jiang Zong, who was in the heaven and earth mystic opening state, seriously. Moreover, Chu Xiu could feel that when Lu Sanjin said this, it was not because he was the eastern region wayfarer of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, but because he had the qualifications to look down on Jiang Zong. Lu Sanjin waved his hand in a very friendly manner and said, "Since Brother Yin Lingzi is here today, I will treat the two of you to a meal as an apology." Lu Sanjin's attitude was very humble, and Chu Xiu could not refuse. This person had a temperament that seemed to be able to get familiar with anyone very quickly. Moreover, Chu Xiu also wanted to find an opportunity to ask Lu Sanjin about Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. According to the Wind Smell Pavilion's records, Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji had caused such a big commotion 500 years ago, and the Imperial Sky Pavilion and other large sects in the eastern region knew about it. Moreover, it was the Imperial Sky Pavilion who had personally ordered the Dilua mountain range to be sealed off. Others might not know about it, but the Imperial Sky Pavilion definitely knew about it. Chapter 1103. Lu Sanjin was very friendly, which was actually an advantage, but Chu Xiu also found a shortcoming of him, which was stinginess. He said that he would treat Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi to a meal. Originally, Chu Xiu thought that he would definitely take them to the largest restaurant in Anzhou Prefecture for a meal. But in the end, he took Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi to a small restaurant in the nameless town to eat hot pot chicken, and also freeloaded a pot of wine from the owner. Seeing Chu Xiu's slightly strange look, Lu Sanjin smiled and said, "Brother Chu, I am not neglecting you. Don't think that this restaurant is inconspicuous, but the hot pot chicken here is quite famous. Every time I come to Fenglin Prefecture for inspection, Jiangzong invites me to eat delicacies, but I am too lazy to go. Every time I specially come here to eat hot pot chicken. Brother Chu, try it, the taste is definitely not bad." Chu Xiu picked up a piece with his chopsticks, and the taste was indeed very good. He did not know whether it was because of the good feng shui of the Daluotian region, or because of the excellent skills of the restaurant. The chicken was incomparably delicious. At this time Yin Lingzi had already begun to eat. Yin Lingzi was also very handsome, and his Taoist robe matched his temperament, which naturally gave him a feeling of being free and unfettered. But at this time when he was eating he wolfed down the food as if someone was fighting with him, which greatly affected his image. Although it was not the first time that Lu Sanjin met Yin Lingzi, it was the first time that he invited Yin Lingzi to a meal. Seeing him like this, Lu Sanjin could not help but feel a little puzzled. "Brother Yin Lingzi, why does the Lingbao temple force you to abstain from eating?" Yin Lingzi smiled embarrassedly and said, "I've let the two of you see something embarrassing. Although the Spirit Treasure Temple doesn't require you to abstain from eating, Uncle Master Lin's cooking is very delicious. However, he only cooks one good dish per meal, and the rest is just half-hearted. According to him, every time he cooks, only the first dish is the most diligent, and when he cooks the second dish he can no longer achieve perfection. 9 points or 1 point is the same anyway, it is all to fill the stomach, so it is fine as long as it is edible. That's why every time we eat we'll start fighting for the good dish. It's already become a habit." Chu Xiu rubbed his chin. The kitchen of the Ling Bao Temple was a place that produced talented people. Even the chef in charge of the kitchen was not simple. Everyone ate and chatted at the same time. Of course, most of the time it was Lu Sanjin who was talking. Yin Lingzi would occasionally interrupt, and Chu Xiu was listening. Chu Xiu had more or less learned about the Dalyu Ocean from the books and records of the major powers in Fanglin Commandery. However, the more profound matters were obviously not things that the sects in Fanglin County could know. Learning this information from a disciple of a large sect like Lu Sanjin was more valuable than information from other sections. Halfway through the meal, Lu Sanjin suddenly sighed and said, "The Dalyu Ocean have not been at peace for the past few hundred years. Things were happening everywhere in the north, south, east and west regions. I only found out about the situation in other places after I returned to the Imperial Sky Pavilion some time ago. In the southern region, the blissful demon palace has started to stir up trouble again. Those madmen study all kinds of strange things every day. Sooner or later they'll cause trouble. It's said that a madman appeared in the northern region. When the Tao Master of the Three Pristines was preaching, he publicly refuted the Tao Master's philosophy. It's said that he caused quite a stir. In the western region, the heavenly Luo Treasure Temple and the Sanskrit sect are locked in a fierce battle. They're all bald, so why bother to make things difficult for bald donkeys?" Listening to Lu Sanjin's words, Chu Xiu thought to himself that the Dalyu Ocean and the mortal world were not much different. It seemed peaceful, but in fact there were turbulent undercurrents. In that case, only the eastern region is the most peaceful. Lu Sanjin sneered and said, "On the contrary, the eastern region is the most chaotic. A few hundred years ago the Cold River City rose and became a top sect. The eastern region isn't small, but it's only so big. The top forces are limited. Now that the Cold River City is suddenly involved, who knows how much killing and scheming is going on. Now that such a big thing has happened, it's not a big thing to look back at the other things in the eastern region." Speaking of this, Lu Sanjin suddenly asked Yin Lingzi, "By the way, brother Yin Lingzi, is there anything unusual in the blessed abode of your treasure temple recently?" Chu Xiu gently knocked on the table. He knew what the blessed abode was, which was also a common knowledge of the Dalyu Ocean people. The so-called blessed abode was, in fact, the same as the mortal world and the 6 illusory realms in the mortal world. It was a subsidiary space of the Dalyu Ocean people. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth there was even denser than that of the outside world. There were also some strange phenomena formed by heaven and earth, which had the power to seize the fortune of heaven and earth. All the top Dalyu Ocean sects had their own blessed abode, and some even had more than one. It was said that when the Cold River City rose in the past, the blessed abode in the eastern region had been divided. But Meng Xinghe, with the secret method of his Xinghe loose cultivator, forcibly created a blessed abode, which shocked the Dalyu Ocean people. Yin Lingzi shook his head and said, "No, everything is normal." Lu Sanjin sighed and said, "I heard that one of High Heaven sect's blessed abode, the Jade Mirror, has shown signs of Yuan Qi spreading, so High Heaven sect has sealed off the Jade Mirror and no disciples are allowed to enter it. The elders of my Royal Heaven Pavilion are worried that the great ancient calamity will repeat itself in the Dalyu Ocean world." Chu Xiu asked, "What does the leakage of Yuan Qi from the blessed abode have to do with the great ancient calamity?" There were countless speculations about the great ancient calamity in the mortal world, but in the Dalyu Ocean world, the other small sects only recorded some common knowledge of the Dalyu Ocean people. There were also descriptions of the great ancient calamity, but they were vague and unclear. Lu Sanjin was surprised and said, "Didn't your master tell you about these things?" since you are a descendant of the ancient venerables, you should know about these things. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, I do know, but because of the enmity between my master and the sect, he is extremely strict with me. My cultivation is practically like a maniac, so how would I have the time to look at these messy things? My accent sounds a little strange because all these years besides cultivating, I haven't even had the opportunity to speak. Yin Lingzi looked at Chu Xiu sympathetically and said, Then Brother Chu is really pitiful. Lu Sanjin also nodded in agreement, it is indeed pitiful. Unable to eat, unable to drink, unable to touch women, having to face an old man every day. Brother Chu, don't you feel depressed? Jiangzong said, You are ruthless, is it because you are? Chu Xiu coughed and said, Let's talk about the great ancient calamity. Lu Sanjin forcefully changed the topic and said, Actually, there's nothing much to say. In any case, according to the records of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, humans have a lifespan, and nothing in this world is eternal. Naturally, it's the same for this world. The great ancient calamity is the end of the lifespans of the world, so all kinds of natural disasters and even man-made disasters occur. The Three Pure Palaces explanation is very interesting. According to him, the world will not die, but will change its appearance after a reincarnation. However, people like us are like parasites living in this world. We are already familiar with this world, so naturally we can't bear to change our environment. Therefore, this calamity is not a calamity of the world but a calamity of the human race. Fortunately, before the great ancient calamity arrived, there were already some signs and strange phenomena. Among them, the leakage of the vitality from the various grotto heavens and blessed lands is one of them. This has not happened in the Daluocean for the past 10,000 years, but in the past few hundred years, there have been signs of it. Yin Lingzi said, Actually, this is considered a normal phenomenon. The space in the grotto heavens and blessed lands is unstable, and it is easy for fluctuations to occur. When outsiders enter to cultivate or set up formations, it is easy for the grotto heavens and blessed lands to be damaged. Lu Sanjin drank the last mouthful of wine and said, I hope so. However, there are always pessimistic people who are worried that the great ancient calamity will come again. But it doesn't matter whether it comes or not, I have no hope of meeting it in this lifetime. After I die, I don't care about the great ancient calamity. After eating, Chu Xiu asked Lu Sanjin tentatively, Brother Lu, since you are the Eastern Region wayfarer, you must know a lot about the Eastern Region. You should know from Jiangzong that it is not convenient for my bloodline to reveal our name. If we don't find the enemy of my ancestral master and defeat his successor, my bloodline will not have the face to reveal our name. So, do you know that 500 years ago, there was an expert in devil arts in the Eastern Region called Dugu Weiwei? Lu Sanjin curled his lips and said, In my opinion, you primeval venerable successors are so pretentious. Didn't you lose once? Why are you so serious? It's not like everyone has never lost in their lives. Although he said that, Lu Sanjin still thought about it carefully for a moment. He shook his head and said, I don't remember. More importantly, it's been too long. 500 years is enough for several generations to reproduce. If you ask me about the current situation, it's more like it. However, I don't know. Someone should know. Our Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master was a martial immortal realm expert. 500 years ago he belonged to that generation. Although I dare not say he was in the Imperial Sky Pavilion's upper echelon, his status was not low either. If there really was such a person, he should know. At this point, Lu Sanjin's eyes suddenly turned and he said, Brother Chu, why don't we make a deal? If you want information about this person, I can introduce you to our Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master. Ever since he handed over the position of Imperial Sky Pavilion's previous pavilion master 100 years ago, he no longer cares about the Daluocean's affairs. It's not easy for others to meet him. Chu Xiu knocked on the table and asked, What's the deal? Lu Sanjin grinned and said, It's very simple. Soon, our Imperial Sky Pavilion will have a martial arts exchange with High Heaven Sect. Both sides will send some disciples to participate. I want to invite Brother Chu to join the martial arts exchange as my Imperial Sky Pavilion's honored guest. With Brother Chu's strength, it's too unfair for you to be an honored guest of that 9 Phoenix Sword sect. What kind of trash is that 9 Phoenix Sword sect? Even if Brother Chu can compare to Meng Xinghe, can his 9 Phoenix Sword sect compare to Cold River City? Not everyone is like Yi Wei Kong. Chapter 1104. Lu Sanjin's sudden invitation surprised Chu Xiu a little. Although the two sides were not enemies before, their relationship should not have been this good, right? As such, Chu Xiu asked curiously, Since it's a martial arts practice between the two sects, why don't you participate, Brother Lu? The position of Eastern Territory Traveler can be said to be the successor to the Pavilion Master. I can't think of anyone in the entire Imperial Sky Pavilion who is more suitable to participate in this martial arts practice than Brother Lu. Lu Sanjin said awkwardly, I would like to participate, but in this year's martial arts practice between the two sects, I am forbidden from participating. High Heaven Sect and my Imperial Sky Pavilion are both great sects in the Eastern Territory, so this martial arts practice has been held more than once or twice. However, during the last martial arts practice, there was a guy from High Heaven Sect who had a foul mouth, so I couldn't hold back and directly crippled his cultivation, so I was banned from participating in the next martial arts practice. If I were to brag about myself, without me in this martial arts practice, High Heaven Sect would definitely lose, so the Pavilion Master has long since asked me to find a way. He even said that I have many friends and could pull one of them over as an honored guest to participate in this martial arts practice. At this point, Lu Sanjin smiled bitterly and said, I do have many friends, but none of us are idiots. Although this is just an ordinary martial arts practice, it is a matter of face for both High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. If someone represents Imperial Sky Pavilion and defeats High Heaven Sect, it will definitely affect the relationship between their sects. For example, fellow Taoist Yin Ling Zi is here now, but I didn't invite him for this reason. I can't let fellow Taoist Yin Ling Zi's Spirit Treasure Temple form a grudge with High Heaven Sect over such a trivial matter. But Brother Chu is different, you are Gu Zun's successor, so you don't have to worry about High Heaven Sect targeting you. Moreover, High Heaven Sect won't run to the Mountain Forest to find trouble with your ancestral founder over such a trivial matter. Brother Chu, if you agree, not only can I introduce you to my Imperial Sky Pavilion's old ancestor, I can also treat you like a top-honored guest of my Imperial Sky Pavilion. Ever since Ming Xinghe, the practice of Daluotian recruiting guest elders had become prevalent. However, a sect like the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect wouldn't be able to keep a powerful guest elder even if they found one. However, for a top sect like the Imperial Sky Pavilion, their guest retainers of various abilities were divided into various ranks. The highest level of guest elders were reserved for experts in the profound understanding realm. As for martial immortals, experts of that level would not be willing to become a guest elder for others. Lu Sanjin said that he would give Chu Xiu the highest level of treatment, which was almost to treat Chu Xiu as a mysterious opening realm expert. Chu Xiu's lips curled into a smile. Deal? There was no benefit in keeping a low profile. After figuring out the general situation of the Daluotian people, Chu Xiu's high-profile actions had borne fruit, just like now. No one doubted Chu Xiu's true identity since he was invited by the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. Lu Sanjin was overjoyed and said, since that's the case, we'll set off after settling some matters. By the way, Brother Yin Lingzi, you've been traveling around the Daluotian. You should be interested in the martial arts exhibition between the two sects, right? Why don't we go together? Yin Lingzi also smiled warmly and said, sure. After finalizing the matter, Lu Sanjin was swift and decisive. He first brought Chu Xiu to the eastern region. Chu Xiu was still the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect's guest elder, so he had to inform the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect first. Although it was fine not to inform them, the Imperial Sky Pavilion was very particular. They could be overbearing, but they could not be unreasonable. Therefore, Lu Sanjin called Lin Yazi to the Province Prefecture. Meanwhile, in the Province Prefectural Governor's mansion, Jieringzong looked at Chu Xiu and Lu Sanjin with a dumbfounded expression. Previously, he had been doubting Chu Xiu's abilities. In the blink of an eye, Chu Xiu had become the Emperor Sky Pavilion's guest elder. Since Lu Sanjin had confirmed that Chu Xiu was Gu Zun's successor, his identity must be correct. Lu Sanjin's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was almost equivalent to that of a crown prince in the lower realm. Even a feudal lord like Jieringzong had to give him face and treat him politely. Although not every Eastern region wayfarer would eventually become the Imperial Sky Pavilion's pavilion master, at least more than half of them did. This probability was very shocking. At this moment, Jieringzong was secretly thankful that he was used to being cautious. Otherwise, he would not care about anything and offend Chu Xiu thoroughly. That would be troublesome. Jieringzong laughed heartily and said, back then I said that Chu was extraordinarily talented and looked like Gu Zun's successor. There's no doubt about it. Now it seems that I was right. Lu Sanjin pursed his lips. That was not what Jieringzong had said previously. He had described Chu Xiu as very suspicious. After some small talk, Lin Yazi brought Lin Fengwu to the prefectural governor's mansion. On the way there, Lin Yazi was nervous. He did not know if Chu Xiu's attitude had angered the prefectural governor and he had come to cause trouble for them. After all, Jiangzong had rarely sent a sect's leader directly to the prefectural governor's mansion. When they arrived, Jiangzong said, "Sect leader Lin Chu has now joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. I'm here to inform you." In Jiangzong's opinion, there was nothing much to say to a sect like the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Not to mention that Chu Xiu had joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a guest elder. Even if they wanted the Nine Phoenix Sword sect's core cultivation method, they would have to obediently hand it over. However, as the Eastern Region advisor, Lu Sanjin did not want to have a bad reputation. That was why he was a little unreasonable. Lin Yazi was shocked when he heard this. He wanted to say something, but in the end he said helplessly, "I know. I wish young Master Chu a bright future." Previously, Lin Yazi had been fantasizing that the Nine Phoenix Sword sect could one day become the next Cold River City. Now that he had finally woken up from his dream, he could not help but worry. What would happen to the Nine Phoenix Sword sect now that Chu Xiu had left? One had to know that the people Chu Xiu had killed and the things he had done would eventually be blamed on the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. Chu Xiu coughed and said, "There's one more thing I'd like to trouble you with, prefectural governor. No matter what, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was the first sect I joined. Now that I'm leaving, there's still a trace of kinship left. Therefore, I'd like to trouble you to look after the Nine Phoenix Sword sect after I leave." Speaking of which, Chu Xiu had really messed with the Nine Phoenix Sword sect this time. Chu Xiu did not expect that he would encounter Lu Sanjin and become a guest elder of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore, his previous plan was to support the Nine Phoenix Sword sect to the extent that it could dominate Fonglin County. That was why he had offended people without any restraint. On account of the kinship, Chu Xiu did not mind helping the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. After all, it was just a matter of saying the word. To Jiangzong, it was just a matter of saying the word. He waved his hand and said, "No problem. The Nine Phoenix Sword sect will be fine in Fonglin County." Now that Chu Xiu had become a guest elder of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, he was one of them. Moreover, Lu Sanjin had personally recruited him into the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so he must be on good terms with Lu Sanjin. Naturally, Jiangzong would not reject such a simple request. When Lin Yazi and Lin Fengwu walked out of the prefectural governor's manor, Lin Yazi could not help but say when he saw Lin Fengwu's dazed expression, "Girl, don't tell me you have some improper thoughts about that young Master Chu? I'd advise you to get over it. We're from two different worlds. Although I named you Fengwu, you're not a true phoenix. He's a true dragon." "Ah, I've been thinking too much. I really thought I was Yi Wei Kong from Cold River City." Lin Fengwu had been strong-willed since a young age, and her strength was not inferior to that of a man. Therefore, it was not strange that she would fall for a powerful young expert like Chu Xiu. However, Lin Yazi had finally gotten over it. He and Chu Xiu were indeed from two different worlds. He was only the sect leader of a small sect, while Chu Xiu was the successor of Gu Zun. Over the years, there had been many successors of Gu Zun as guest elders, but only Cold River City had risen to prominence. Lin Fengwu forced a smile and said, "Father, you must be joking. I'm just feeling pity for the Nine Phoenix Sword sect." Actually, Lin Yazi was right. She did have some thoughts about Chu Xiu. She was a competitive person, but those so-called young talents in Fonglin County could not even compare to her. What right did they have to catch her eye? Therefore, when Chu Xiu, who was so powerful that Lin Fengwu had to look up to, appeared, she immediately attracted her attention. However, when she saw that Chu Xiu's current status was on par with the prefectural governor, she knew that she and Senior Chu were indeed from two different worlds. At the prefectural governor's manor, Jiangzong had given face and agreed to Chu Xiu's request. Hence, Chu Xiu could not be too careless. He thought about it and said, "What prefectural governor wants to do now is to be transferred back to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters?" Jiangzong glanced at Lu Sanjin and nodded. "That's right. Although some people like to be a local tyrant, I'm still obsessed with martial arts." Everyone in the Imperial Sky Pavilion knew what he was thinking about, so he did not need to hide it from Lu Sanjin. Chu Xiu said, "I can give you an idea, prefectural governor. You can plunder, obtain more resources from Fonglin County and increase your merit." "What idea?" Jiangzong did not think much of it. He had been the prefectural governor for more than 10 years. Did he need a young martial artist like Chu Xiu to teach him anything? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "Prefectural governor, it's a good idea to earn benefits by maintaining the balance in Fonglin County. However, it's too slow. There will only be pressure when there's competition. Why don't we change the method?" "Prefectural governor, You can announce that you're going into seclusion but secretly provoke the martial arts world and Fanglin County to kill each other. However, when someone's clan is annihilated, you can ask for the benefits. It can't be more, but it can't be less either. 50% is just right. This way the ambitious forces will see the benefits. Even if it's just 50% of the resources, they'll still be willing to fight for it. The forces without ambition will start accumulating their strength passively in order to protect themselves. The entire Fanglin County is like a pool of stagnant water. How boring is that? Prefectural governor, you'll gain more benefits if you move. The only drawback of this method is that it will quickly create a powerful force. It all depends on whether prefectural governor can suppress them. Chapter 1105. After listening to Chu Xiu's suggestion, Jiaringzong and Lu Sanjin broke out in a cold sweat. Chu Xiu's move was indeed ruthless. However, at the same time he was shrewd enough to get himself out of it. Jiaringzong only benefited from the fact that he did not make a move. Therefore they could not blame Jiaringzong and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Unless all the forces in Fanglin County had no desires and did not fight for it. Unfortunately, fighting and killing were the nature of martial artists, and greed was human nature. Jiaringzong could imagine that if he followed Chu Xiu's plan, Fanglin County would turn into a pot of porridge in a short period of time. Of course he would be the one eating the porridge. As for the shortcomings mentioned by Chu Xiu, he did not care at all. No matter how big a sect was, could it be bigger than the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Jiaringzong subconsciously glanced at Lu Sanjin. Lu Sanjin chuckled and said, I won't care about these things as long as you don't cause trouble and ruin the reputation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Jiaringzong bowed to Chu Xiu and said with a solemn expression, Thank you Chu for your suggestion. It was a simple matter for him to help Chu Xiu look after the 9 Phoenix Sword sect. However, Chu Xiu's idea was to help him accumulate merits faster and return to the Imperial Sky Pavilion's headquarters. After Chu Xiu and the others left, Jiaringzong felt that something was amiss. Wasn't Chu Xiu the successor of Gu Zun? He was obsessed with the martial Dao. Why would he have so many schemes? It was even more than Jiaringzong, who had been the prefectural governor for more than a decade. However, Jiaringzong did not think too much about it. Strength and scheming were never proportional. He had seen many people who were strong but simple-minded. They were brainless and rash and they only knew how to use their fists. Maybe Chu Xiu was born to be scheming. As the successor of Gu Zun, he should not only be talented, but also not be bad in other aspects. Take Ming Xinghe for example. He was not only powerful but also had good connections. He helped Cold River City come up with many ideas and pushed it into the ranks of the top sects in the world. The place where Royal Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect would hold the martial show was in High Heaven City, where High Heaven Sect was located. The martial arts demonstration between the two sides was actually more like a dispute over grievances. Since the beginning of the ancient Great Tribulation, the two sects had actually been at odds with each other. In addition, High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion were very similar in terms of martial Dao and martial Dao, so the two sides had not been pleasing to the eye for a long time. Before the ancient Great Tribulation, the two sides had fought several times. However, after coming to the celestial absolute heaven, they knew that they were already considered lucky survivors. Every cultivator was extremely precious and should not be wasted in meaningless fights. Therefore, when the people of the two sects clashed again, the high-level officials of the two sects set a rule that no life-and-death fights were allowed. Every 5 years, there would be a martial arts demonstration, only competition, no life-and-death battles. Either side could put up a bet or various conditions. 10,000 years later, although the Daluotian sects had developed to this scale and were not afraid of a life-and-death battle, it did not matter to Imperial Sky Pavilion and High Heaven Sect. Although the two sects had conflicts, they also found the benefits of using this method to resolve conflicts. Of course, the premise was that High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion could maintain their strength at an equal level. Otherwise, if one side was too weak, they could not blame others for being destroyed. High Heaven City, Eastern Territory. When Lu Sanjin brought Chu Xiu to High Heaven City, Chu Xiu finally realized how big the entire Eastern Territory was. Previously, he had only wandered around Fanglin County, and in his opinion, although the scope of Fanglin County was much larger than that of the lower world, it was not too exaggerated. But after crossing several regions of the Eastern Territory with Lu Sanjin, Chu Xiu discovered that the area of Fanglin County was actually quite small among the several counties under the jurisdiction of Imperial Sky Pavilion. Although Imperial Sky Pavilion's sphere of influence was not comparable to that of Eastern Qi in the lower world, It was comparable to that of northern Yen. High Heaven City, where High Heaven sect was located, did not belong to any county but was instead a giant city. The city walls were thousands of meters high, and looking up from below, one could not see the edge of the city. Moreover, all the city walls were built with a kind of bluestone with a white jade luster, giving off a solemn and dignified feeling. Lu Sanjin saw the slightly shocked look on Chu Xiu's face, but he just curled his lips and said, High Heaven sect just likes to show off their face, it's not very useful. Although he said so, Lu Sanjin was still a little jealous, because High Heaven sect's ostentation was indeed much larger than his Imperial Sky Pavilions. The people of Imperial Sky Pavilion were relatively straightforward, and when they first came to the Daluotian continent, they did not think too much about it and rebuilt the sect according to the scale of the lower world, unlike High Heaven sect, which had specially gathered all kinds of strange materials from the Daluotian continent to build a magnificent sect. Entering High Heaven City, Chu Xiu suddenly felt an extremely rich world yuan qi wash over him. The world yuan qi in the Daluotian continent was already very rich, but the world yuan qi in High Heaven City was even more amazing. The entire High Heaven City was covered in spirit arrays, and with the support of these spirit arrays, the original world yuan qi of the outside world was condensed, making the entire High Heaven City look like a paradise. Since High Heaven City was where High Heaven sect was located, most of the people here were naturally cultivators from High Heaven sect. These cultivators from High Heaven sect were all dressed in white robes and had confident and proud expressions on their faces, giving off the aura of a great sect. However, this was not what Chu Xiu was focused on. He found that these Daluotian sects always seemed to like to dress the same way. When he first came here, the people from the small sects he met thought he was a mysterious heavenly realm cultivator. Obviously, mysterious heavenly realm cultivators liked to wear black robes while High Heaven sects preferred to wear white. At this time, when the two sects were conducting a martial arts exhibition, some of the Eastern Territory's big sects and some famous people would also come to watch, so it was easy to distinguish who was a disciple of High Heaven sect and who was an outsider. Lu Sanjin said, Brother Chu, Brother Yin Ling Zi, the people from my Imperial Sky Pavilion should have already arrived, and the martial arts exhibition will begin in a few days. During this time, we will go to my Imperial Sky Pavilion station to rest for a while. Chu Xiu and Yin Ling Zi both nodded and followed Lu Sanjin's arrangements. The location of the martial arts exhibition between the two sects changed every time. Last time it was Imperial Sky Pavilion, and this time it was High Heaven sect station. Although the conflict between the two sects was somewhat deep, it was still acceptable on the surface. At the very least, the station that High Heaven sect arranged for Imperial Sky Pavilion was quite good. It was a special hall filled with cultivators belonging to Imperial Sky Pavilion. After the Imperial Sky Pavilion cultivators guarding the entrance saw Lu Sanjin, they immediately respectfully greeted him as Sir and welcomed him inside. Did Pavilion Master and the others not come this time? Lu Sanjin asked casually. One of the guards replied, Sir Pavilion Master has some matters to attend to and is unable to leave, so he asked Sir Zhong to bring some people here. Hearing this name, Lu Sanjin's expression changed slightly. Yin Ling Zi only cared about the surrounding scenery and did not pay attention to it. Chu Xiu noticed the anomaly and asked, What's wrong? Lu Sanjin snorted lightly and said, It's nothing, I just found someone I don't like. Zhong Qiushui is the Vice Pavilion Master of our Imperial Heaven Pavilion. However, he's a little stubborn and overbearing. If he says anything unpleasant later, I hope Brother Chu and Brother Yin Lingzi won't take it to heart. I'm the Eastern Region Wayfarer, so I'm not under his control. Hearing Lu Sanjin say this, Chu Xiu's face also showed a subtle look. With the experience Chu Xiu had accumulated in the lower realm, with just a few words, he had already understood what was going on in Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was nothing more than internal discord. There were many strange things going on within the sect. In any case, Chu Xiu had never seen many sects that could really work together. However, as soon as this idea came to his mind, Chu Xiu glanced at Yin Ling Zi subconsciously. It seemed that the Spirit Treasure Temple had always been very united, and there had never been any internal strife. However, after thinking about it carefully, the number of people in the Spirit Treasure Temple had never exceeded 3 digits. If there was internal strife with such a small number of people, it would really be impossible. Regarding Zhong Qiushui, in fact, even if Lu Sanjin did not introduce him, Chu Xiu also knew about him. He had obtained the various records of the Wind Scent Pavilion, and there was a lot of information about the Imperial Sky Pavilion. In fact, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had never had the position of Vice Pavilion Master. The Pavilion Master was the Pavilion Master. There was no need for a chief or a deputy. The style of doing things that carried enormous weight was more suitable for the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, among the experts of the previous generation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the current Pavilion Master, Heavenly King, Li Wuxiang, and the Vice Pavilion Master, Earthly Venerable, Zhong Qiushui, were known as the Imperial Sky Pavilion's two heroes. The two of them almost suppressed the cultivators of the same realm in the High Heaven sect to the point that they could not raise their heads. In the end, during the selection of the Pavilion Master, the two of them were originally in the Heaven and Earth mystic realm. However, Li Wuxiang suddenly stepped into the martial immortal stage and became the Pavilion Master of the current generation of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. However, for some reason the previous generation's old Pavilion Master did not arrange another position for Zhong Qiushui. Instead, he stood his ground and created a new position of Vice Pavilion Master for Zhong Qiushui. However, from then on, a piece of news came out of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. The two people who were originally close friends often had conflicts. In any case, they were not on good terms. Chu Xiu dared to guarantee that there was definitely something fishy going on. However, he was not very curious and could not be bothered to find out what was going on. While he was thinking, Lu Sanjin had already brought Chu Xiu and Zhong Qiushui into the depths of the main hall. More than 10 cultivators from the Imperial Sky Pavilion who came to participate in the martial arts exhibition were there. Among the cultivators present, apart from 2 or 3 who were older, the rest were young cultivators. Even the weakest was at the real pellet realm. Among these people, a middle-aged man in a bright yellow luxurious robe sat in the middle. The middle-aged man was tall and had a dignified appearance. Anyone who looked into his eyes would not be able to see his true gaze. If one tried to look, they would only see a glaring golden light. This person was the Vice Pavilion Master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Earthly Venerable, Zhong Qiushui. As soon as they met, Zhong Qiushui said coldly, "Lu Sanjin, didn't you receive the sect's order? The martial arts exhibition between the two sects is such a big event. Why are you dilly-dallying and rushing for time?" Chapter 1106. As the Eastern Region Advisor, Lu Sanjin's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was not low. Even though Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi were outsiders, they could sense the strange atmosphere between the two of them when Lu Sanjin used an interrogative tone. Chu Xiu was also secretly looking at Zhong Qiushui. His impression of Zhong Qiushui could only be described in one word: unfathomable. Although Zhong Qiushui had not reached the martial immortal realm, he was still at the peak of the Heaven and Earth profound enlightenment realm. With Chu Xiu's current cultivation, he dared to fight ordinary Heaven and Earth profound enlightenment realm cultivators, but when facing Zhong Qiushui, he still could not figure out his opponent's strength. In the lower realm, Chu Xiu had only felt this kind of feeling from one person, and that was Yi Xiaonan after refining the demon seed. This existence, who was once on par with the Pavilion Master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, was really not someone easy to deal with. At this time, Lu Sanjin changed his usual frivolous appearance and said tit for tat, "The martial arts exhibition hasn't started yet, so what's the hurry? The Pavilion Master told me that I can't participate in this martial arts exhibition, so he asked me to find a friend to take the lead. See, I want to find him now." Zhong Qiushui glanced at Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi. In an instant, a huge pressure had already attacked them. Chu Xiu furrowed his brows slightly, and a faint demonic aura rose around him, isolating him from the pressure. Yin Lingzi, who was next to him, also bloomed with a 7-colored glow, isolating the pressure. Seeing this scene, Lu Sanjin stepped forward directly, stood in front of the two and said coldly, "Vice Pavilion Master, what do you mean by this? I found these people to help my Imperial Sky Pavilion, not to be wronged here." Zhong Qiushui said lightly, "What's the hurry? Can this senior still bully these junior cultivators? Since you want them to help my Imperial Sky Pavilion, I have to see if they have the qualifications and strength to do so. Where did these two youngsters come from? Although you have many friends, are you sure any of them are willing to form a grudge with High Heaven Sect just to help you?" Lu Sanjin pointed at Yin Lingzi and said, "This is Yin Lingzi from Lingbao Temple." Yin Lingzi smiled and nodded at Zhong Qiushui. He was not angry at Zhong Qiushui's probing just now. Zhong Qiushui was surprised. Silver Spirit Son with natural Dao aura? Although Zhong Qiushui was a martial artist of the older generation, he had also heard of Yin Lingzi's name. After all, Yin Lingzi was the only Daoyuoshan who had been personally accepted by the Dao Master as a disciple, or more accurately, as a successor to his legacy. Yet, the Dao Master had still rejected Yin Lingzi. Lu Sanjin coughed and said, But this time, Taoist brother Yin Lingzi is only here to watch the fight. If Taoist brother Yin Lingzi were to participate in this fight, it would cause High Heaven sect to hold a grudge against Spirit Treasure Temple. Brother Chu Xiu is the one fighting on my behalf. He's Gu Zun's successor. His status and strength are enough to represent the Imperial Heaven Pavilion in the battle. I've already made him our Imperial Heaven Pavilion's guest elder. Gu Zun's successor? Zhong Qiushui glanced at Chu Xiu suspiciously. He did not expect that Lu Sanjin would even be able to hook up with the Gu Zun's successor. May I ask which Gu Zun's successor is he? Chu Xiu did not reply, so Lu Sanjin said, Brother Chu, it's a little difficult to reveal the identity of your lineage as there's an enemy who once defeated the founder of his lineage. So, you must wait until Brother Chu defeats that successor and redeem yourself before you can reveal your name. Before Zhong Qiushui could speak, a young cultivator from Imperial Heaven Pavilion sneered, What a joke! Lu Sanjin, do you believe such words? If he says he's the Gu Zun's successor, then he's the Gu Zun's successor. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry can say they're the Gu Zun's successor. Lu Sanjin said coldly, Huangju, it's not your turn to speak here. The martial ancestor of Brother Chu's branch has a strong background. He's familiar with the two Dao Masters of Spirit Treasure Temple, Qing Yun and Zi Yang, as well as Reverend Crimson Afterglow before the Great Ancient Calamity. Brother Yin Lingzi can testify to this. Everyone present glanced at Yin Lingzi. Since Yin Lingzi stood there without saying anything with Spirit Treasure Temple's endorsement, this Chu Xiu should be the real deal. At this moment, Chu Xiu said indifferently, Brother Lu, previously you invited me to join Imperial Heaven Pavilion as a foreign elder, but this is the first time I've heard of it. Is this the treatment a foreign elder receives? Putting aside the fact that I've been suspected, I've actually become a Tom, Dick, or Harry now. Lu Sanjin's expression changed as well. He did not want to offend Chu Xiu because of these matters. He was the one who found Chu Xiu. In the future, when Chu Xiu became the foreign elder of Imperial Heaven Pavilion, he would naturally stand on his side. Offending Chu Xiu was probably what Zhong Qiushui and the others wanted. However, at this moment, Zhong Qiushui waved her hand and said, Chu, you don't have to feel so aggrieved. Although a foreign elder is a foreign elder, the treatment our Imperial Heaven Pavilion gives to foreign elders isn't that bad. We've paid such a high price. What's the matter? Can't you just interrogate and test the foreign elder's character? Chu Xiu scoffed softly and said, Deputy Pavilion Master, I don't care about the conflicts and enmity between your Imperial Heaven Pavilion, and I can't be bothered. However, if someone tries to burn the fire on my head, don't blame me for being impolite. Who was the one who said I was a Tom, Dick, or Harry just now? Chu Xiu looked at Huangju. His aura was piercingly cold like a sharp blade as it sliced through the air, causing a crisp sound to be heard. At a time like this, it was not Chu Xiu's turn to keep a low profile. After all, his current identity was Gu Zun's successor. Everyone was a dragon and phoenix among men, and they were all extremely talented. It would be strange if someone like him could tolerate being called a Tom, Dick, or Harry. Moreover, when Chu Xiu was in the lower realm, he was already the leader of the Devil sect. He was a prominent figure in the Devil Path who was seen as a great enemy by the Taoist sects and Buddhist sections. Even if Ramashutzi came, they would not dare to point at Chu Xiu and call him a Tom, Dick, or Harry. That would not only be an insult to Chu Xiu, but it would also be an insult to themselves. However, to Chu Xiu's surprise, a golden light flashed around Huangju and blocked Chu Xiu's aura. He stepped forward and sneered disdainfully, Ignorance is not a crime. Is Gu Zun's successor really that petty? Very well, I would like to see for myself what kind of person the legendary successor of Gu Zun is capable of. As soon as Huangju's voice fell, blinding golden qi shone around him. He drew upon the power of heaven and earth and turned into golden runes that circled around him. This young man who seemed to be about the same age as Chu Xiu had a cultivation base at the peak of spiritual refinement state. Zhong Qiushui said faintly, That's great. Since you weren't here this time, I was going to let Huangju replace you. Now that you've found a helper, let's let Huangju test his skills. Cultivation base is not equivalent to combat strength. Gu Zun's successor is indeed talented, but there are many who have practiced martial arts for their entire lives and still do not know how to fight in the end. No matter what his identity is, since he has become the Imperial Heaven Pavilion's guest, he'll represent the Imperial Heaven Pavilion to fight. If he's too pathetic, it'll be the Imperial Heaven Pavilion's disgrace. Hearing Zhong Qiushui's words, Lu Sanjin hurriedly transmitted a message to Chu Xiu, saying quickly, Brother Chu, be careful. Don't be fooled by this Huangju's arrogant, egotistical, and idiotic appearance. This fellow is not easy to deal with. He fought his way up from the bottom of the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. Before he was 15, he followed a county governor to suppress the sex riots. In the end, he was valued by the vice pavilion master and kept by his side. His strength was forged from fighting with the sword and saber. Back then he even fought with me for the position of the East Region Wayfarer, but I defeated him. However, all these years he's been kept by the vice pavilion master's side to cultivate. Who knows if he has any trump cards? Before Lu Sanjin could finish speaking, Chu Xiu took a step forward and threw a punch. When the punch was thrown, the entire hall seemed to tremble. The gold-and-silver true fire of inner energy and the pitch-black flames of devastation swirled around Chu Xiu's fist wind like a tornado that tore the heavens and earth apart. The fist intent of the punch was extremely domineering, as if it was the only one in the entire world. The moment Chu Xiu's punch landed, everyone's expressions including Zhong Qiushui's changed. Perhaps Qinqing Di was not the first to think of the cultivation method of tempering one's body with true fire, but Qinqing Di was the first to succeed in using it. Even in ancient times, no one had tried such a crazy method, especially in the Daluotian Empire, where the qi of heaven and earth was abundant. There were too many opportunities to advance, and very few people would even think of this seemingly crazy method of cultivation. Now, Chu Xiu's punch seemed to have unleashed the physical strength of the true fire to the extreme. The punch shattered the heavens and earth, and the powerful force caused Huangju's expression to change abruptly. Countless ways to block and dodge flashed through his mind in an instant, but there was only one result, and that was that he could not dodge or block it. Almost in the blink of an eye, the powerful force had already arrived in front of him. It was an extremely simple punch without any changes, but it was more terrifying than those complicated martial arts techniques. Huangju shouted, and the runes that glowed with golden light around him condensed into a large seal in front of him, drawing the power of heaven and earth to meet Chu Xiu's punch. This was the Imperial Sky Pavilion's secret martial arts technique, the Imperial Sky Seal. The Imperial Sky Queen of Earth, controlling all things. However, all of this was useless in the face of absolute power. The punch landed and the seal shattered. A powerful force suddenly exploded with the two of them as the center. Zhong Qiushui, who was standing at the side, waved his hand and set up a realm. When the force collided with the realm, there was a series of explosions. Chu Xiu's figure remained where he was, but Huangju had already been sent flying dozens of feet away by the punch. He resisted the urge to fall to the ground, but he had just taken a step when he spat out a mouthful of blood. The entire place fell silent at once. Lu Sanjin's mouth was agape, and he forcefully swallowed his last warning to Chu Xiu to be careful. Monster, he was definitely a monster. Although Huangju's status in the Imperial Sky Pavilion was not as high as his, the Eastern Region Wayfarer, he was still a top-notch figure among the younger generation. However, Huangju could not even block a single punch from Chu Xiu. What kind of monster did he bring back? Chapter 1107. One could say that Chu Xiu's punch had stunned everyone present. Lu Sanjin was even glad that the Silver Spirit Child had appeared when he and Chu Xiu were fighting earlier, so the two of them did not really fight. Otherwise, he would not have been able to withstand the power of Chu Xiu's punch without using that thing. Moreover, Lu Sanjin was certain that Chu Xiu had not used his full strength yet. This was because he saw the broken scabbard hanging on Chu Xiu's waist. He did not understand why the descendants of Gu Zun, who mostly looked like ascetic cultivators, would carry a flashy scabbard inlaid with purple gold and jade. This might be Chu Xiu's personal preference. However, Lu Sanjin was certain that since Chu Xiu carried a saber with him, the saber hidden in the flashy scabbard was definitely not a decoration. A cultivator who used a saber was already so terrifying even before he drew his saber. One could only imagine how powerful he was. Although her own disciple had vomited blood from Chu Xiu's attack, Zhong Qiushui did not get angry, nor did she find trouble with Chu Xiu by bullying him. He was the deputy pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so he was magnanimous. He merely took a good look at Chu Xiu and said calmly, "Very well. You'll represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion as the finale of the martial arts exhibition this time." As soon as he was done speaking, Zhong Qiushui waved his hand and got someone to take the injured Huangju away. After everyone else had left, Lu Sanjin came up to him and sighed. "I didn't expect Brother Chu's strength to be so terrifying. Fortunately, I didn't fight you back then. Otherwise, I don't know if my weak body would have been able to take it." Chu Xiu only smiled and said nothing. He would not take Lu Sanjin's words seriously. Ever since he had pushed the heaven's sun gazing at air to its peak when he faced the head-piercing 7 arrows, his experienced spiritual senses had become extremely sensitive. He was certain that Lu Sanjin's ability was not as simple as he appeared to be. This Eastern region traveler from the Imperial Sky Pavilion must still have a trump card. By the way, Brother Chu, I still have to tell you the rules of the martial arts competition. In fact, there are no rules, but you have to pay attention to one thing. This time, everyone is fighting to determine the winner and loser, not to fight to the death, so you can't be heavy-handed. Speaking up to this point, Lu Sanjin smiled bitterly and said, "Last time, because I used a heavy hand, I was scolded when I went back and was banned from participating in this martial arts exhibition." Lu Sanjin was really afraid that Chu Xiu would use a heavy hand in the martial arts practice. Although he hadn't known Chu Xiu for a long time, he could tell that Chu Xiu was a ruthless person. Back in Fanglin County, when he was a guest elder of the 9 Phoenix Sword sect, he was very decisive in killing people. He even came up with a vicious plan for Jiangzhong. Of course, it may have been a good idea for Jiangzhong, but to the entire Fanglin County, it was extremely vicious. This kind of way of doing things was enough to prove that Chu Xiu was not a kind person. A person's personality and martial path usually complemented each other. Based on Chu Xiu's personality, Lu Sanjin was sure that he would not go easy on him. Chu Xiu waved his hand casually and said, "Don't worry, I know the severity of the situation. I'm not the kind of person who likes to kill. Once I make a move, I will fight to the death." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Sanjin nodded and said, "All right, Brother Chu, go and rest with Brother Yin Lingzi first. Tomorrow I will bring you around High Firmament City. There's actually nothing much to see here, but since it's your first time here, you can look around casually." At this moment, on a 9-story building outside the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall, a young man dressed in a white brocade robe embroidered with golden dragon patterns looked in the direction of the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall. He raised his brows slightly and said, "There are people fighting at the Imperial Sky Pavilion? Go and find out what's going on." The man was handsome, but his brows were raised extremely high. The arrogance in his eyes seemed to be innate and would not disappear no matter how hard he tried. A moment later, a disciple returned and reported, "I've found out that the Imperial Sky Pavilion's Lu Sanjin will not be participating in the martial exhibition this time, so he found a good friend of his to be the Imperial Sky Pavilion's guest retainer to represent him in the martial exhibition. I also heard that this guest retainer is a prime sovereign's successor." However, Lu Sanjin and Vice Pavilion Master Zhong Qiushui have always been on bad terms. It seems that Zhong Qiushui doubted that this person could represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion, so the two sides tested each other out. In the end, the prime sovereign's successor won. Although the Imperial Sky Pavilion's main hall was filled with their own people, this was High Firmament City after all. It was very easy for them to find out what was going on here. The young man's lips curled into a faint smile and said, "What a pity that Lu Sanjin won't be able to participate. Junior brother Zhong Lu, it seems that I won't be able to avenge you. It's a pity that I was in retreat during the last martial exhibition. Otherwise, the one who would have been crippled might have been Lu Sanjin." There was another young cultivator next to the young man, and his face darkened slightly when he heard this. He was the disciple whose cultivation was crippled by Lu Sanjin during the last martial exhibition because of his foul mouth. However, his master had a very high status in High Heaven sect, so he asked for a 9 revolutions divine pill to reconstruct his meridians. Although he managed to recover some of his cultivation, it was not even half of what it was before. The young man in front of him did not dare to provoke him when his cultivation was still at the same level, but now that he saw this young man expose his scars, he could only sullenly say, "It doesn't matter, my personal grudge is just a small matter. This time, I still need to rely on senior brother Shenyuan to defeat the Imperial Sky Pavilion and wipe away our previous shame." Senior brother Shenyuan nodded directly and said, "Yes, when I wasn't here last time, you bunch of wastes actually lost so miserably. How useless." Upon hearing this, many of the High Heaven sect disciples present almost suffered internal injuries. Although this senior brother Shenyuan was strong and what he said was indeed true, saying it in front of so many people, did you even consider our feelings? However, they also knew this young man's character, and they were indeed not his opponents, so they could only silently accept the title of waste. The next day, Lu Sanjin called Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi early in the morning to go to the largest restaurant in High Heaven City, the 9-story tower, to eat. Everything in High Heaven City was run by High Heaven sect, and this 9-story tower was the same. Although High Heaven Tower only had 9 floors, Each floor was more than 10 meters high, and the interior was unusually gorgeous and majestic. The white jade-like floor could even be used as a mirror. Chu Xiu had always been puzzled by High Heaven sect's aesthetic standards. They seemed to blindly pursue grandeur and magnificence. This place was a restaurant for eating, so why did it have to be so grand and solemn? It would affect one's appetite. The last 3 floors of High Heaven Tower were not open to the public, and only the real high-level members of High Heaven sect could enter. So Lu Sanjin directly led the two to sit on the 6th floor. After ordering a lot of dishes, Lu Sanjin introduced, "These guys from High Heaven sect are actually very boring and their cooking is the same. Their dishes are very rough, and there is no technical content at all. The only thing that is more interesting is that all the ingredients used are exotic delicacies produced in the Di Luo mountain range, and if you are lucky, you can even eat the meat of high-rank vicious beasts." Saying this, Lu Sanjin also glanced around, winked and whispered, "Now is the time for the martial arts competition between the two sects. If it was on a normal day, there would be foreign singers and dancers performing here. Although they are singers and dancers, in fact, when they meet young talents, it is also common for them to offer themselves to sleep with them. Brother Chu, Brother Yin Zi, you are absolutely qualified. Now there should be some singers and dancers who have not left. Do you need me to help you find a few?" Yin Zi smiled and shook his head. This little Taoist does not approach women. Lu Sanjin was surprised. When did your Tao sect start to pay attention to this kind of thing? Did you learn it from those bald donkeys in the West? Yin Zi shook his head and said, "Second martial uncle said that women are tigers, you can't touch them, you can't touch them. Love is difficult to overcome, like subduing dragons and tigers. Without this kind of state of mind, don't enter the gate of love." Lu Sanjin touched his nose and said, "In fact, you can ignore love and only talk about money. A pure physical relationship is the best." Yin Zi continued to shake his head. Second martial uncle also said that in the mortal world, it is easy to lose one's state of mind. Of the two words lust, love, comes first, lust comes second. Don't mix it up. Lu Sanjin was thoroughly impressed. This was obviously a very romantic matter, but he was actually discussing it with Yin Zi in a serious manner. "Your second martial uncle is a genius. I heard that Spirit Treasure Temple is good at producing geniuses. It really is a well-deserved reputation." Lu Sanjin turned his eyes to Chu Xiu. "Brother Chu, do you need one? Rest assured, I will definitely choose a good one for you. You have been cultivating hard in the mountains and forests for decades, and now that you have finally come out, why don't you let go of yourself?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I also abstain from lust." Lu Sanjin was stunned. Did these two like to learn from those bald donkeys in the West? Chu Xiu glanced at him and said, "Don't forget, the martial arts practice is in a few days. Is it appropriate to waste your energy on women at this time? Did you do the same when you participated in the martial arts practice last time?" Lu Sanjin coughed awkwardly. He did not dare to do this during the martial arts practice last time, because it was the pavilion master who personally came with people, and he was closely watched. However, it was also the pavilion master's fault that he was so heavy-handed. If it wasn't for the fact that he was so strict, causing him to be filled with anger, he would not have been so heavy-handed during the martial arts practice. Just as Lu Sanjin was about to say something, a voice suddenly sounded. "Anyway, the result is that you will lose. It doesn't matter what you do before the martial arts practice, there is no need to be so nervous." Chu Xiu frowned slightly. He did not see the face of the person who spoke, but the arrogance in the tone was already overwhelming. Moreover, this person's tone was not just brainlessly arrogant, but full of confidence. Chu Xiu did not like to deal with such people because usually their brain circuit was not quite the same as that of ordinary people, and it was easy for them to be swayed by emotions. However, hearing this voice, Lu Sanjin's face suddenly darkened. Xianyuan Wushuang. Why did this guy come out of seclusion? He is really annoying. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Xianyuan? This was the first time he had seen such a powerful surname. Chapter 1108. When Chu Xiu saw Xianyuan Wushuang, he could almost guess what kind of existence he was. He was so arrogant that he didn't take anyone seriously. However, Xianyuan Wushuang had the qualification and strength. Chu Xiu cultivated true fire body refining and true fire refining, so his strength was comparable to that of a profound enlightenment realm expert. But it was only comparable. Except for Ling Yunzi, who had just stepped into the profound enlightenment realm, most of the others were stronger than Chu Xiu in terms of strength. However, Chu Xiu had never seen anyone in the true fire spiritual cultivation state who could compete with him in terms of strength and foundation. Even Kang Dongming, the sword sage of the East Sea, was no match for him. But now Chu Xiu saw that Xianyuan Wushuang's strength was not inferior to Chu Xiu's. Lu Sanjin secretly transmitted his voice to Chu Xiu, "Brother Chu, be careful of this guy who looks like he has a mental problem, although in fact he does have a mental problem." Chu Xiu asked, "His surname is Xianyuan? A descendant of the human emperor?" Anyway, Chu Xiu had never seen the surname Xianyuan in the mortal world. It only existed in the legends of primitive times. It was said that the ancestor of the human clan was surnamed Xianyuan. Lu Sanjin curled his lips and said, "A descendant of the human emperor? This surname is given by him and even his name is given by him. According to him, he is the most unique existence in the world, unparalleled in the world. How can his surname be the same as others? How could a normal person do such a thing? Isn't this a mental problem?" But although this guy has a mental problem, he is a complete monster. It is said that he was born without meridians. He has no meridians all over his body, so he can't cultivate any true qi at all. When he was first brought back to High Heaven sect, the person in charge of recruiting disciples was scolded by his superiors for bringing back a piece of trash. However, High Heaven sect was quite generous and did not drive him away directly, instead planning to drive him out after he reached adulthood. Who would have thought that although this guy couldn't cultivate true qi in the beginning, he relied on an introductory cultivation technique to forcefully open up a new path, allowing the power to circulate in every part of his body. He didn't have meridians, but his flesh and bones were meridians, so his true qi accumulation and operation were amazing. Almost no one in that group of disciples could compare with him. At that time, Xianyuan Wushuang was less than 10 years old. Later, he was accepted as a direct descendant of High Heaven sect, and along the way, his cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. Any martial arts ancient book that fell into his hands, he could learn it in an hour, achieve minor accomplishment in a day, and comprehend 90% of its essence in just 3 days. Although this guy had some mental problems, it had to be said that he was really a genius in martial arts. I didn't of him of Xian Wushuang of Xianyuan Wushuang. I didn't expect that he would come out. After listening to Lu Sanjin's information, Chu Xiu was also a little surprised. When he was in the mortal world, he had seen many geniuses. For example, LV Fengxian, who had amazing luck, 7th young master Feng, who had a natural sword Dao, Zhang Qingzhen, who had condensed the golden core of thunder, and Zhong Xian, who had cultivated the bright king seal to an unprecedented level. If these people were placed in the environment of Daluo heaven, they would definitely be first-class figures. But Xianyuan Wushuang, who could modify his cultivation method at the age of 10 and walk on his own martial Dao, was simply a monster. Xianyuan Wushuang glanced at Lu Sanjin and said faintly, "Lu Sanjin, I know you must be secretly sending a voice transmission to slander me, but it doesn't matter. The strong won't be angry because of the weak's slander and clamor, because that's all you have left." Lu Sanjin was a thick-skinned person. He almost fell out with Chu Xiu before, but after knowing Chu Xiu's real identity, he changed his face in the blink of an eye. But now, facing Xianyuan Wushuang, Lu Sanjin was so angry that his hands were trembling. Xianyuan Wushuang was not mocking him but stating a fact. He really thought so, which was why Lu Sanjin was so angry. When encountering such a lunatic, even if you scolded him, you would not be able to defeat him. Xianyuan Wushuang. The martial arts exhibition will start in a few days. What are you doing here? Could it be that you want to have a fight before the martial arts exhibition? Xianyuan Wushuang glanced at Lu Sanjin and said lightly, "I'm not here for you." After saying that, he turned his eyes to Chu Xiu and said, "Are you the successor of Ancient Venerable who agreed to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign elder?" Chu Xiu touched his nose and nodded. Chu Xiu might be able to guess the thoughts of others, but he really could not figure out Xianyuan Wushuang. Xianyuan Wushuang nodded and said, "Unfortunately, you made a wrong choice. The former pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was a great figure, but he was already old. Heavenly King Li Wuxiang was not bad, but the Imperial Sky Pavilion had an earthly master, Zhong Qiushui. The two of them were fighting and there would be no peace. Looking at the younger generation, even a person like Lu Sanjin could become the East Domain Traveler, which showed that there was no one else in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was unwise for you to choose to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion at this time. But you are very lucky to have met me. Now, I'll give you a chance to join the High Heaven sect as a foreign elder. What the Imperial Sky Pavilion can give you, the High Heaven sect can also give you. What the Imperial Sky Pavilion can't give you, the High Heaven sect can still give you. Lu Sanjin did not expect that Xinyuan Wushuang would dare to expose the shortcomings of the Imperial Sky Pavilion in front of him. He shouted angrily, "Xinyuan Wushuang, what do you mean? Are you slandering the Imperial Sky Pavilion, or are you afraid that you will lose badly in the martial arts exhibition field? Nonsense. Do you really think there is no one else in the Imperial Sky Pavilion?" Xinyuan Wushuang still said in a very indifferent but extremely arrogant manner, "The outcome has been decided. Why would I be afraid of losing? I just want to win a little more beautiful too. During the martial arts exhibition field, there will be 3 rounds of 3 battles. I want to win all 3. If the successor of the ancient venerable meets the other disciples of the High Heaven sect, those good-for-nothings won't be able to stop him." Chu Xiu was shocked at this time. It was the first time he had seen a weirdo like Xinyuan Wushuang, who even scolded his own people when he went crazy. After he said this, the faces of the warriors of the High Heaven sect behind Xinyuan Wushuang darkened, even darker than Lu Sanjin's. Now Chu Xiu also believed in Xinyuan Wushuang's strength in the High Heaven sect. If Xinyuan Wushuang acted like this and spoke without scruples, he would have been beaten to death long ago if he was not strong enough. Moreover, he had to be very strong to the point where he could ignore all kinds of schemes and plots. Otherwise he would be easily killed by others. Chu Xiu wiped his nose and said, "I'm sorry, I have to keep my word. I Chu Xiu am a man of his word. Since I promised to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign elder, I won't go back on my word." Xinyuan Wushuang shrugged and said, "Very well, there will always be people who keep making wrong choices in this world and never look back on the wrong path. It's not wrong for you to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion, but you made a mistake in meeting me, your opponent, when you joined the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Of course, you may regard me as your opponent, but my opponent will only be in the future." After saying this, Xinyuan Wushuang turned around and left with his people. For him, it was not worth making trouble for Chu Xiu before the martial arts exhibition field began. Moreover, he had never used any conspiracy since he was a child. In the face of anything, he would use his own strength to overcome it. This was his code of conduct. After Xinyuan Wushuang left, Yin Lingzi hesitated for a long time before saying, "I've heard that the character of this genius of the High Heaven sect, Xinyuan Wushuang, is somewhat indescribable. Now it seems that it is true." Lu Sanjin sneered and said, "Indescribable? He's a psychopath." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "There is a difference between a psychopath and a genius. As you said, this person is not easy to deal with. The fact that he was able to survive until now with the way he did things is the best proof." Lu Sanjin nodded gloomily. After the dishes were served, he asked Chu Xiu and Yin Lingzi to eat. His good mood was now completely ruined by Xinyuan Wushuang. However, Lu Sanjin's impression of Chu Xiu had improved a lot. People like Lu Sanjin seemed to be familiar with everyone and seemed to be friends with everyone, but in reality, that was probably because he was good at socializing. But in fact, there were only a few people who he could really treat as friends. Lu Sanjin had treated Chu Xiu the same way before. As the Eastern Territory partner, it was normal for him to try to rope in a prime venerable's successor in his territory. But this time, Chu Xiu refused the recruitment of the High Heaven sect, which made him feel grateful. Because Xinyuan Wushuang was right. The Emperor Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven sect had been fighting against each other for so many years, but the Emperor Sky Pavilion had always been at a disadvantage. And now, it happened to be the time when the Emperor Sky Pavilion was at a disadvantage. If the Emperor Sky Pavilion had the upper hand, Lu Sanjin would not have been reprimanded and banned from participating in the martial arts exhibition last time when he had crippled someone. The Emperor Sky Pavilion could have explained it by saying that weapons had no eyes and fists had no heart, and they might have even rewarded Lu Sanjin afterwards. However, he was not as strong as Xinyuan Wushuang and gave him a reason to cause trouble, so he could only keep a low profile for the time being. 3 days later, the martial arts exhibition between the High Heaven sect and the Emperor Sky Pavilion was held as scheduled. At the very center of High Heaven City was a huge terrace that was thousands of meters long and wide. Countless spirit arrays were set up on it, and statues stood at each of the 4 corners. It was said that these were statues of the 4 ancestral masters who had made the greatest contributions to the High Heaven sect. This was the place where the High Heaven sect held the martial arts exhibition, but at other times, it was also used by the High Heaven sect's masters to give lectures. In the past, the martial arts exhibition between the 2 sects was used to settle personal grievances, but later on, it had become a conventional rule. There were even many foreign cultivators who came to watch the ceremony. The people of the High Heaven sect and the Emperor Sky Pavilion were on the north and south sides, while the east and west sides were reserved for the spectators. Sitting among the Emperor Sky Pavilion's crowd, Chu Xiu looked around. At this time, Lu Sanjin came over and said, "Brother Chu, there will be a martial immortal master from the High Heaven sect coming to give a lecture. You probably haven't heard of him, so listen carefully. Know yourself and know your enemy and you will never be defeated." Chu Xiu's eyes lit up when he heard this. Chapter 1109. Chu Xiu had various speculations and conjectures about the martial immortal realm. In the lower realm, Chu Xiu was certain that there should be 4 people who had reached the martial immortal realm: Dugu Weiwei, Ning Xuanji, Zhong Xinxiu, and Jun Wuxian. Moreover, Chu Xiu even suspected that Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji were top existences even among martial immortals. However, Chu Xiu did not know whether the martial immortal realm was divided into several small realms. There were no records about this in the ancient books he had searched in Fanglin County, including the records of the Wind Smell Pavilion. For fear of being suspected, Chu Xiu did not ask Lu Sanjin and Yin Lingzi. Both of them should know. If he could see a real martial immortal now, Chu Xiu would be able to roughly infer the level of existence in this realm. The whole place was bustling for a while, and after a while it suddenly quieted down. A large number of High Heaven sect disciples in white came out, led by an old man and a middle-aged man in silver-white Qilin radiant armor. Lu Sanjin introduced, "The old man is the previous sect master of High Heaven sect, Qin Baiyuan, and the one in the armor is the current number 1 general of High Heaven sect, the battle god monarch, immortal Linghu, who is responsible for guarding High Heaven sect. This is not an ordinary person. High Heaven sect is the most important cultivation paradise in High Heaven sect. And High Heaven sect also contains all the historical books and other precious items of High Heaven sect. It can even be said that High Heaven sect's sect master can die in battle, but immortal Linghu is the last barrier guarding High Heaven sect. If he dies, High Heaven sect will be destroyed." Chu Xiu touched his chin. He did not ask much, but he had roughly estimated the strength of High Heaven sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion. There were 2 martial immortals in Imperial Sky Pavilion, the previous pavilion master and the current pavilion master, Li Wuxiang. On the other hand, High Heaven sect was able to suppress the Royal Sky Pavilion. They had already sent out 2 martial immortals, and their sect master had yet to come out. Furthermore, after seeing the 2 people before him, Chu Xiu was finally certain that the 4 people he had guessed were all martial immortal level existences. At least from the aura that Chu Xiu sensed, Zhong Xinxiu's strength was absolutely stronger than the 2 present. It was simply unfathomable. Jun Wuxian's strength was also much stronger than the old Qin Baiyuan. In terms of pure aura, he was almost on par with Linghu Xianshan. Of course, this was only Chu Xiu's judgment based on his own senses. There would be a lot of mistakes. If they really fought, it was still unknown who was stronger between Linghu Immortal Mountain and Jun Wuxian. But thinking about it this way was a little scary. Previously, Chu Xiu had thought that the difference in strength between the lower realm and the Daluotian was that the Daluotian were stronger. This had nothing to do with the person but the environment. But now, he realized that the waters of the lower realm were deeper than Chu Xiu had imagined. If one could step into the martial immortal realm in a place like the lower realm, how strong would he be after coming to the Daluotian? At this time, after the people of High Heaven sect exchanged a few words, the sermon was about to begin. This time the person giving the sermon was Qin Baiyuan. In fact, most of the Daluotian cultivators who gave sermons were powerful and prestigious older cultivators like Qin Baiyuan. In terms of combat power, they might not be as strong as Linghu Immortal Mountain who was in his prime, but in terms of comprehension of the martial Dao, they were undoubtedly stronger than the other party. Qin Baiyuan walked to the center of the terrace, sat cross-legged on the ground and said, "The way of martial Dao is to reach the heavens and enter the earth. It is to cultivate oneself and comprehend the heavens and earth." In the past sermons, some things have been said too many times. This old man wants to say something new this time. Looking around, Qin Baiyuan said in a deep voice, "Today what I want to talk about is the way of fighting." As soon as these words came out, everyone present showed a look of interest. Many people knew that High Heaven sect's combat power was very strong. Therefore, the way of fighting explained by the masters of High Heaven sect aroused their interest even more. Fighters fight against each other and dance with weapons in hand. When martial artists fight and kill, their control over their martial skills and the changes in their mental state are all extremely important. Qin Baiyuan was obviously very proficient in teaching this kind of thing, so he spoke with confidence and assurance on the terrace. The others also listened with great interest, but after listening for a while, Chu Xiu shook his head gently. It was not that Chu Xiu was arrogant and could not even bear to listen to the sermon of a martial immortal, but rather that what Qin Baiyuan said was of no use to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu's strength was obtained from slaughtering his way through bloody storms. If it was the Tao of battle, then he wasn't inferior to others. The only difference was that he could fight, but he couldn't speak with confidence and composure like Qin Baiyuan. Moreover, he also found that it was no wonder the Daluotian cultivators were so keen on teaching. In fact, they did not have any real goods to offer. It was like someone telling you that you could succeed as long as you worked hard, and then casually giving you a few examples. However, when you tried to do it, you would find that the key was not whether you worked hard or not, but how you should work hard. This kind of sermon would not reveal the secrets of the sect, and it could also gain fame, so why not? Of course, it did not exclude the possibility that some masters might really have some real goods to offer. Qin Baiyuan spoke for a full hour. When he was done, he looked at the Imperial Sky Pavilion side and said calmly, "Vice Pavilion Master, I've said what I wanted to say. Let's not waste any more time. Who's going to go first in the martial arts competition?" Zhong Qiushui waved his hand, and a tall cultivator with a slightly arrogant expression walked to the center of the arena. Chu Xiu suddenly realized that the disciples of the Daluotian sects did not seem to be small, but there were not many who were as modest and polite as Yin Lingzi. This was also related to the environment of the Daluotian. The territory was vast, and most of the cultivators who traveled the Jianghu were actually in their own territory. There were too few incidents and dangers, and no matter where they went, there would be people who would treat them well. It was not strange for them to develop such a temperament. In the lower world, the geniuses on the dragon and tiger list like Chu Xiu had been fighting with all kinds of people since they were young. They had experienced the struggle between cultivators and Buddhists, the struggle between righteous and demonic, and the intrigue between aristocratic families. Everyone knew that there was always someone better out there, so they could not be arrogant even if they wanted to. High Heaven sect also waved their hands and someone immediately came down to fight. Chu Xiu glanced at the two people fighting and felt that they were not very interesting. Most cultivators in the same realm as the Daluotian were actually weaker than those from the lower world in a real battle. With the strength of these two people, forget Chu Xiu, even cultivators who had just entered the true fire soul refining realm like Chu Wuji or Lu Fengxian could easily deal with them. Of course, the only thing shocking about them was their age. The two fought for less than a quarter of an hour before the cultivator from the Royal Sky Pavilion was defeated. The martial Tao of the High Heaven sect was very similar to that of the Royal Sky Pavilion. They were both the type that was fierce and imposing to the extreme. Therefore, when the two sides fought, they mainly competed in terms of strength. In the second round, Zhong Qiushui waved his hand and the person who came up was Huang Ju, who had been punched by Chu Xiu and vomited blood. Although this guy had been punched by Chu Xiu before, there were still many precious medicinal pills in the Royal Sky Pavilion. He had recovered in a few days. Seeing Huang Ju come up, Xianyuan Wushuang from the High Heaven sect was stunned. Previously, Xianyuan Wushuang thought that the Royal Sky Pavilion would let the strongest person defeat the weakest person on their side and then use a piece of trash to fight with him. Who would have thought that they would leave the successor of the ancient venerable to him? Had they given up on treating him, or had they overestimated the so-called successor of the ancient venerable? Xianyuan Wushuang chuckled and did not think about it anymore. Anyway, in his opinion, as long as he went up, the result was destined. There was nothing to worry about. At this time, Huang Ju had already fought with the warriors of the High Heaven sect. It was no wonder that Lu Sanjin had warned Chu Xiu about how troublesome Huang Ju was. Although Huang Ju's foundation was far inferior to Chu Xiu's, his battle prowess was not weak. He had directly suppressed Chu Xiu and defeated him in 15 minutes. With one win and one loss, Xianyuan Wushuang snorted and said, "Trash." According to his original plan, although it was the best of three, the rule was that he had to fight in all 3 rounds. Therefore he had to win all 3 rounds. He did not expect that before he met Chu Xiu, his side had already lost one. The defeated disciple of the High Heaven sect was angry, but he did not dare to say anything. In the stands, Qin Baiyuan frowned and said, "Wushuang needs to change his character. He needs to treat his own people more gently. Why does he have to act like an enemy? If he continues like this, how can he convince the public if the High Heaven sect is handed over to him in the future?" Linghu Xianshan said lightly, "Since he can't be the sect master of the High Heaven sect, he can follow me and be the gatekeeper. Isn't it better to guard the High Heaven sect and not have to deal with those intrigues?" Qin Baiyuan smiled bitterly. Although the gatekeeper of the High Heaven sect was equally important, The sect master who commanded the entire High Heaven sect was undoubtedly the most important. When the third round began, Xianyuan Wushuang stepped onto the high platform, which immediately caused a burst of discussion. Not to mention the entire East Territory, even in the entire Daluotian, Xianyuan Wushuang had a great reputation. Of course, there was a mixture of praise and criticism. When Chu Xiu also stepped onto the platform, everyone was stunned. Who was he? Was he a new disciple of the Imperial Sky Pavilion? When the identity of Chu Xiu was announced, everyone realized that he was the successor of Gu Zun. Since the incident in Cold River City, it was not uncommon for foreign elders to represent their own disciples. Therefore, it was normal for Chu Xiu to represent the Imperial Sky Pavilion in the competition. However, everyone was also wondering about Chu Xiu's identity. Which successor of Gu Zun was he? In ancient times, there were not many Gu Zun who cultivated in seclusion in the mountains and forests, but there were still quite a few of them. Moreover, they would send their disciples into the Jianghu every few days. Therefore, those big sects knew the names of most of the Gu Zun. However, it was strange that the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not announce Chu Xiu's successor. Chapter 11:10. Although the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not explain the inheritance of Chu Xiu, since they had sent such a successor of the ancient venerables, his strength should not be weak. To be precise, every successor of the ancient venerables who stepped into the Jianghu was not weak. Of course, this was only for ordinary warriors. For a big sect like the High Heaven sect, whatever the successors of the ancient venerables had, they also had, and whatever the successors of the ancient venerables did not have. In such an environment, the disciples taught by the High Heaven sect would not be weaker than the successors of the ancient venerables. Xianyuan Wushuang stepped onto the terrace, looked at Chu Xiu, shook his head and said, "It's a pity that you finally made such a wrong decision. But you're also lucky because you can't use too much force in the martial arts practice." Lu Sanjin, that idiot, couldn't control his anger and used too much force. As a result, he was reprimanded and punished. Why bother? It's not a glorious thing to show off your power to the weak. Don't worry, it will be solved soon. When the others heard Xianyuan Wushuang's words, they all had different expressions on their faces. Although they had long heard that this genius disciple of the High Heaven sect was a little strange, they had never expected him to be so strange. Chu Xiu also frowned. He was not so easily provoked, but facing a guy like Xianyuan Wushuang at this time, his patience was almost at its limit. The moment Chu Xiu unsheathed the formation-breaking saber in his hand, the surrounding essence of heaven and earth was turned into the extreme yin force along with the saber's sharpness. Perhaps it had something to do with the rich essence of heaven and earth in the Daluotian, but Chu Xiu also found that his formation-breaking saber had changed after coming to the Daluotian, and the essence of heaven and earth seemed to be stronger. Lu Sanjin, who was in the spectator stands, raised his eyebrows. Indeed, Chu Xiu was most proficient in saber techniques. Xianyuan Wushuang showed a confident smile and said, "Your saber is good." As his voice fell, Xianyuan Wushuang took a step forward, and a dazzling gang qi burst out from his body. Almost in the blink of an eye, Xianyuan Wushuang absorbed almost all the essence of the world within a radius of 1,000 feet. All of it was under his control, making Xianyuan Wushuang as dazzling as the sun. Everyone at the scene was shocked as they discussed among themselves. Xianyuan Wushuang was born without meridians and should have been a waste. In the end, he relied on this kind of aptitude to forcefully create a cultivation method that was most suitable for him. At this moment, when he attacked, his strength and foundation were simply terrifying. Even some of the experts in the profound enlightenment realm could not guarantee that they could control more heaven and earth energy than Xianyuan Wushuang. The difference between a peerless genius and a lunatic trash resulted in Xianyuan Wushuang. Like a blazing sun falling from the sky, a powerful force directly crushed towards Chu Xiu. When dealing with most people, Xianyuan Wushuang did not bother to waste so much energy and directly used the simplest means to crush them. However, this time he was facing Chu Xiu, the successor of the ancient master, so he used a little more strength. Narrowing his eyes, Chu Xiu chopped down with the formation-breaking saber in his hand. In an instant, the sharp light was dazzling. Time seemed to have stopped in an instant. Chu Xiu's saber traveled through time and space, and the people present did not even blink. But the next moment, Chu Xiu's saber had already appeared in front of Xianyuan Wushuang. Under this saber, everything could be broken. The sharpness of saber principle was exerted to the extreme by Chu Xiu's saber. With the formation-breaking saber as the center, everything in the world seemed to be divided into two halves. The powerful gang qi was neatly torn, and the blazing sun was divided. Xinyuan Wushuang's eyes were full of shock and disbelief. He had never expected that the guy in front of him was so strong, so strong. In a hurry, he shouted and pinched the incantation with his hands. The silver gang chi turned into talismans and condensed into the shadow of a divine gate in midair. High Sky Southern Gate. The power of the divine gate was solid and heavy, reaching the sky and the earth. But the saber move made by Chu Xiu could be said to be the extreme of his saber principle. This saber move perfectly combined the red dust cut with the saber essence of the breaking formula. How could it be so easy to resist? With a violent explosion, the whole terrace shook. The formation pattern on it shone with a golden light and blocked the impact of this force. When the storm of gang chi dissipated, the people found that Chu Xiu was still standing there, while Xinyuan Wushuang was directly sent flying by Chu Xiu's saber move. Seeing this scene, the people present suddenly burst into an uproar, their eyes full of disbelief. Although they were all speechless about Xinyuan Wushuang's character, Xinyuan Wushuang's strength was well known throughout the East Domain, even the whole Dalu Ocean. But as soon as they started fighting, he was sent flying by Chu Xiu's saber move. What kind of monster was Chu Xiu? Lu Sanjin's mouth opened wide, and then he glanced at Huang Ju. At this time, Huang Ju's face was a little pale, and he even secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, when Chu Xiu fought with him last time, he used his fists instead of his saber. Otherwise, even the 9 Revolutions divine pill would not be able to save him. At the top of the High Heaven sect stand, Qin Baiyuan frowned and said, "Where did this little guy come from? How can he be so strong? Why do I feel that his saber move is so familiar? I seem to have seen it in an ancient book." Linghu Xianshan waved his hand and asked someone to find detailed information about Chu Xiu. He said indifferently, "It's normal for him to be the successor of Gu Zun. Those guys have been cooped up in the mountains and forests for so many years and paid such a high price. There are always people who are lucky enough to find and cultivate a few outstanding people. Meng Xinghe is one of them." As they spoke, someone brought over Chu Xiu's information. It was extremely detailed. After reading it, Linghu Xianshan shook his head and said, "He is the successor of Gu Zun and has been recognized by Spiritual Treasure Temple and Imperial Sky Pavilion. It seems that his background is not small. However, after being defeated, he won't reveal his name until he gets revenge. Who is this hypocritical guy? Although those Gu Zun have always been very hypocritical, it's really rare to see someone this hypocritical. Since he was recognized by Spiritual Treasure Temple and Imperial Sky Pavilion, Qin Baiyuan and Linghu Xianshan had no doubt about Chu Xiu's identity. Putting Imperial Sky Pavilion aside, Spiritual Treasure Temple had a good reputation among the many Dalu Ocean forces. With Yin Lingzi's confirmation, nobody would suspect that Chu Xiu was a fake. Looking at the ring, Qin Baiyuan said with a frown, "However, this little guy's strength is so terrifying. The outcome of this battle is still unknown." Linghu Xianshan said indifferently, "It's no big deal if you lose. It's okay to lose for a while but don't lose for the rest of your life." Qin Baiyuan sighed and said, "I'm afraid that Wushuang will take things too hard and suffer a blow to his mental state." Linghu Xianshan's mouth twitched as he said, "So what if his mental state is suffering a blow to his mental state? Even if his character changes greatly, can it be worse than it is now?" Qin Baiyuan was stunned. Then he smiled bitterly. It was true. Xinyuan Wushuang's character was already so bad. Even if he changed again, how much worse could it be? In the ring, Xinyuan Wushuang climbed up from the smoke and dust. His eyes were filled with anger and disbelief. He was furious that he had actually suffered a loss at Chu Xiu's hands, and he did not dare to believe that the fellow before him was actually so powerful. "Good. Very good. Very good. You've successfully irritated me. I didn't intend to use my full strength to avoid hurting you by accident and being punished like that idiot Lu Sanjing. But now that you've successfully irritated me..." Before Xinyuan Wushuang finished his words, Chu Xiu moved and chopped down again with his saber. It was still the combination of ethereal cut and breaking formula. The powerful saber intent that seemed to be able to break the world immediately made Xinyuan Wushuang swallow the rest of his words. This guy's mouth was so annoying that Chu Xiu did not want to listen to him anymore. Xinyuan Wushuang looked solemn. As he waved his hands, the powerful essence of the world was completely controlled by him. On both sides, the essence of the world was held in his hands like 2 huge dragons. They intertwined with each other and roared, tearing at Chu Xiu. The saber intent of the breaking formula tore everything in front of him, but the 2 huge dragons of essence overlapped with each other, and the spiral chi kept wearing down the power of Chu Xiu's saber. At this time, Xinyuan Wushuang took out his weapon from the space secret box. It was an extremely gorgeous halberd. A golden dragon coiled around the body of the halberd, and the crescent blade shone with a dazzling light. This High Heaven Dragon halberd was specially made for Xinyuan Wushuang by High Heaven sect with countless rare materials and an ancient venerable who was good at forging and refining weapons, when Xinyuan Wushuang became the #1 among the younger generation of High Heaven sect. There were only a few warriors in the entire High Heaven sect who could receive such treatment. Holding the High Heaven Dragon halberd, Xinyuan Wushuang was surrounded by silver gang qi. He looked like an ancient demon god with golden and silver light intertwining. When the halberd smashed down, it collided with Chu Xiu's breaking formation. Suddenly, a stronger power fluctuation broke out. Even the ground under their feet, which could withstand the pressure of experts in the metaphysic realm, could not bear this power and began to crack. Chu Xiu's physical strength and gang qi power had reached the extreme of the same realm. Although Xinyuan Wushuang's physical strength was slightly inferior to Chu Xiu's, he was born without meridians. The gang qi power had penetrated into his flesh and bones, and his gang qi power was even more majestic than Chu Xiu's. For a moment the two were in a deadlock. Xinyuan Wushuang said coldly, "I told you it's you who forced me to use my full strength." Before he finished his words, an extremely cold force of extreme yin broke out and wrapped Xinyuan Wushuang in it. The next moment, the world-extinguishing fire burned fiercely and wrapped Xinyuan Wushuang in it. Holding the saber in his right hand, Chu Xiu slammed his left palm down. The majestic demon qi gathered and turned into a huge palm print of dozens of meters, directly blasting Xinyuan Wushuang away. Heavenly Demon Palm. Chapter 11:11. Chu Xiu had found many martial arts techniques in the things left by Dugu Weiwei. Unfortunately, they were not killing moves like the mortal world ethereal cut. They were all martial arts techniques used by Dugu Weiwei before he dominated the whole Jianghu. Chu Xiu did not learn these martial arts techniques seriously, but he knew a little about them. Maybe he could use them in the future like the heavenly demonic palm. However, what shocked people was not Chu Xiu's heavenly demonic palm, but the world-annihilating fire. In the human world, no one recognized the world-annihilating fire. After Chu Xiu used it, it had become one of Chu Xiu's symbols. But in the Daluotian world, the world-annihilating fire was a secret cultivation method of the Mahakala Palace of the Sanskrit sect in the western region, which was mysterious and unpredictable. The Sanskrit sect never accepted outer disciples, and Chu Xiu did not seem to be a monk. How could he use the world-annihilating fire? Linghu Xianshan said faintly, "According to the information just now, the inheritance of Chu Xiu's lineage can be traced back to before the Great Ancient Tribulation. Maybe the cultivation method of the Sanskrit sect was leaked at that time. In that period it was normal." Qin Baiyuan also nodded. This kind of thing was not rare. Before the Great Ancient Tribulation the whole world had been in a mess. In order to compete for the places to enter the Daluotian world, various sects were even fighting against each other. In that period, not to mention the cultivation method being leaked, as long as it could save one's life, they could leave anything behind. However, in the field, Chu Xiu's sudden move caught Xinyuan Wushuang by surprise. Xinyuan Wushuang had always thought that Chu Xiu's martial arts was the same as his, which was fierce and imposing. Who would have thought that Chu Xiu would turn around and use the extremely evil world-annihilating fire? The destructive fire burned his gang qi and primordial spirit, which immediately made Xinyuan Wushuang embarrassed. As a result, he was sent flying by Chu Xiu's slap. His anger had risen to the extreme. Previously he was still saying that those who couldn't control their anger were weaklings, but now it was his turn to be the one who couldn't control his anger. This time Xinyuan Wushuang did not say anything. He held the High Heaven Dragon subduing halberd tightly with both hands. Strange patterns loomed all over his body, and the force of heaven and earth crazily poured into his body. If it were an ordinary person this would simply be a self-explosion, but Xinyuan Wushuang forcibly absorbed all the essence of heaven and earth into his body. Feeling that power, Chu Xiu's expression changed slightly. Pure devil qi appeared in his hand, and he shot out 3 city-destroying arrows in succession, trying to stop Xinyuan Wushuang from absorbing the essence qi of heaven and earth. However, the strange patterns in front of Xinyuan Wushuang blocked the arrows before they fell, using the purest primordial qi to purify the force of nirvana on the 3 city-destroying arrows. The next moment, Xinyuan Wushuang was surrounded by the dazzling golden primordial qi. He made a gesture and shouted, "Please enter my body with the fighting soul." In an instant, some kind of power seemed to be triggered. The next moment, the devil qi in the air crazily poured into Xianyuan Wushuang's body. Behind him, a hazy phantom of hundreds of meters high appeared, wearing black dragon armor and holding halberd. Its devil flame was monstrous, and its power was extremely terrifying. A hint of surprise appeared in the eyes of the others. Xianyuan Wushuang had actually gone all out. To be precise, what Xianyuan Wushuang used was beyond the scope of martial skills. It was a secret skill obtained by the High Heaven sect in the past. It could use something inherited from the primordial demon god to guide the demon god's brand into one's body in exchange for great power. This secret skill originated from some extinct ancient barbarian tribes. The High Heaven sect modified it by using the personal items left by the experts in the past to arouse the will imprinted in heaven and earth. It was called Fighting Soul Technique. When one reached the peak of the martial immortal realm, he was truly a powerful existence comparable to heaven and earth. Since the power of Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago could be imprinted in the void, other legendary experts could naturally do the same. However, the premise was that the power of the imprint left by the experts at this level would cause a strong backlash after entering one's body, even if it was activated by the personal items. Therefore, after the Fighting Soul Technique was developed, it was basically shelved. In the history of the High Heaven sect, no more than 3 people could successfully cultivate it. Xianyuan Wushuang was so talented that he directly nourished the fighting soul into his body with the powerful world Yuan Qi. Everyone else was shocked. Only Chu Xiu had a strange expression on his face. He recognized the fighting soul that Xianyuan Wushuang had attracted. The primordial demon god Marquis Lu Wenhou. As a fierce and powerful great demon god in the past, Marquis Lu Wenhou, who could be besieged by all the martial artists in the world. What he had done could even be compared with Dugu Weiwei. Of course, he was qualified to be attracted as a fighting soul. But now, the inheritance of Marquis Lu Wenhou was with him, Chu Xiu. In the past, after Lu Fengxian obtained the inheritance of Marquis Lu Wenhou, she had given Chu Xiu Marquis Lu Wenhou's body refining cultivation method, 9 Heavens Devil Golden Body. Chu Xiu had also cultivated this cultivation method to the profound realm. Now, Xianyuan Wushuang had attracted Marquis Lu Wenhou's fighting soul to fight with him. Who was the fake one? The silver gang qi around Xianyuan Wushuang had disappeared and was replaced by the deep devil qi. He stared at Chu Xiu and said coldly, "Good, very good. In the East region, no one has been able to force me to this point for many years. You should feel honored." Really? Chu Xiu put away the broken formation and walked forward step by step. With every step, the devil qi around him became stronger. In the end, Chu Xiu's surroundings were already filled with demonic flames, roasting his powerful physical body. Waves of trembling energy burst out from his body. Some experts with good eyesight had noticed that the aura exuded by Chu Xiu was exactly the same as that of Xianyuan Wushuang after the fighting soul had been attracted into his body. No, to be precise, the devil qi around him was even purer than that of Xianyuan Wushuang. After all, the devil qi around Xianyuan Wushuang was just some devil qi that was automatically absorbed from the surrounding heaven and earth after the Marquis Lu Wenhou's fighting soul was drawn into his body. The devil qi around Chu Xiu was formed after he cultivated the 9 Heavens Devil Golden Body to the profound realm. Xianyuan Wushuang naturally felt this aura, and even the fighting soul in his body began to become unstable. He was stunned and did not know what was going on. But at this time, Chu Xiu had already rushed over and punched. The devil flame around him was monstrous, and the fist intent seemed to tear everything apart. Xianyuan Wushuang lifted halberd and was about to fight, but the shadow of Marquis Lu Wenhou behind him was constantly trembling. Not only did it not exert the power of the fighting soul technique, but it even dragged him down, making his movements extremely slow. He needed to spend a large part of his energy to suppress the restless fighting soul in his body, so he was directly blown away by Chu Xiu's punch. Chu Xiu's figure did not stop moving. He was also very good at close-range combat. After a series of attacks, Xianyuan Wushuang was basically beaten up and had no power to fight back. In fact, his performance was not as good as before. In fact, Xianyuan Wushuang was also unlucky. He came from the High Heaven sect and had many trump cards, not just the fighting soul technique. If he had fought with Chu Xiu honestly, even if he was defeated in the end, he would not be so embarrassed. But he was unlucky enough to use the fighting soul technique, and it happened to trigger the imprint of Marquis Lu Wenhou, so he could not blame Chu Xiu for being ruthless. Marquis Lu Wenhou had died long ago, and the last bit of his true spirit had been absorbed by Lu Fengxian. Therefore the imprint he left was just an instinct. Since it could be affected by his personal item and guided here, it would naturally be affected by his old cultivation method and even more so. After being suppressed to the extreme by Chu Xiu, Xinyuan Wushuang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, as if he had gone crazy. As Qin Baiyuan had worried before, Xinyuan Wushuang had never lost before. If he lost this time, it would definitely have an impact on his state of mind. Now, Xinyuan Wushuang was not completely defeated, but he was suppressed to such an extent in front of so many people, which had gradually blurred his mind. The next moment, Xinyuan Wushuang blocked Chu Xiu's punch with halberd. He made a seal with his hands and in an instant, his aura suddenly contracted. The next moment, the shadow of Marquis Lu Wenho behind him began to explode. It was not exploding but a powerful explosion caused by his aura. Chu Xiu's face suddenly changed. What a lunatic! Xinyuan Wushuang was not only mentally ill but also a lunatic. Seeing that he could not control the fighting soul, he directly detonated it in his body. Just now, Xinyuan Wushuang had guided the powerful essence of heaven and earth into his body, which shocked even Chu Xiu. He had absorbed this power into his body, and then detonated it together with the fighting soul. What did he want to do? Did he want to die together with Chu Xiu? Last time in the martial arts competition, Lu Sanjin had been punished because he had severely injured his opponent. This time, Xinyuan Wushuang directly turned the martial arts competition into a life-and-death fight. Xinyuan Wushuang wanted to fight to the death, but Chu Xiu did not want to die with him. The next moment, Chu Xiu suddenly began to retreat, and Xinyuan Wushuang followed him with a grim smile. However, as Chu Xiu retreated, he made a seal with his hands. In an instant, countless cold auras gathered around Chu Xiu. Pure demon qi lingered around him, and the cries of ghosts and deities descended from the void. The sky was crying blood rain, and the void was directly torn apart. The demon god's shadow looked down indifferently and reached out a hand to grab Xinyuan Wushuang, trying to pull him into the boundless gloomy world. At this moment, the warriors of High Heaven sect on the platform finally could not sit still. Qin Baiyuan took a step forward and arrived on the balcony. With a tap of his hand, the soaring firmament southern heavenly gate appeared and sealed Chu Xiu's demon wailing heaven great compassion mantra, causing the demon god's shadow to be completely destroyed. The next moment he pointed at Xinyuan Wushuang several times, making him groan and faint, but also calmed the power that was about to explode in his body. Qin Baiyuan looked at Chu Xiu and said coldly, condensing the natural evil demon qi in the world to the extreme, what a vicious cultivation method. Didn't the Imperial Sky Pavilion tell you that you don't need to kill your opponent in the martial arts competition? Chapter 11-12. Xinyuan Wushuang could lose but he couldn't die. After all, he was the most outstanding disciple of this generation of High Heaven sect. In terms of martial Dao talent and cultivation, Xinyuan Wushuang was unparalleled even in the entire history of High Heaven sect. Therefore, even though there was a rule that the older generation warriors were not allowed to participate in the martial arts exhibition, the disciples of High Heaven sect were all crippled by Lu Sanjin in the last martial arts exhibition, but High Heaven sect did not participate in it. However, this time, Qin Baiyuan really could not bear it because this person was Xinyuan Wushuang. Chu Xiu said lightly, "Senior of High Heaven sect, you have to be reasonable when you speak and do things. With so many eyes watching, it's not that I want to kill him, but that someone is crazy and wants to drag me down with him. He wants to die but I don't. Do I need to say who killed him first?" Qin Baiyuan stared at Chu Xiu for a long time, then finally snorted coldly and said, "My High Heaven sect lost this time's competition." Although High Heaven sect's methods were overbearing, they were not unreasonable. In front of so many people, a loss was a loss and their High Heaven sect could afford to lose. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and was about to leave when he suddenly felt that someone was staring at him meaningfully. But when Chu Xiu looked back he found that everyone was looking at him. It was understandable that Chu Xiu could defeat Xinyuan Wushuang. After all, although Xinyuan Wushuang was strong, no one said that he was the top expert of the younger generation of Daluotian. But Chu Xiu's combat strength was amazing. Even among the descendants of prime venerables who had appeared in recent years, few could compete with him, so it was normal that he was the focus of everyone's attention at this time. Chu Xiu frowned slightly. He could sense that the gaze from before was very different from the gazes of the others. It was obvious that there was something strange about it. However, there were too many people present, so Chu Xiu couldn't distinguish it. He could only secretly raise his guard. Lu Sanjin came over excitedly and pulled Chu Xiu along. he laughed and said, "Haha. Brother Chu's strength is really extraordinary." Xinyuan Wushuang was unable to fight back. Unfortunately, that guy actually fainted. Otherwise, I would really like to see his expression. Speaking of which, I'm really lucky to be able to meet you, Brother Chu. Lu Sanjin really thought that he was very lucky. If he did not happen to be near Fanglin County, the Emperor's Sky Pavilion would not have sent him to handle this matter. If it wasn't for Yin Lingzi's timely appearance, he would have definitely fallen out with Chu Xiu. Perhaps they would have already started fighting. After all, this guy's behavior at the beginning was indeed suspicious. If he had not been thick-skinned enough to convince Chu Xiu to join the Imperial Sky Pavilion as their guest, he would not be where he was today. With so many coincidences put together, Lu Sanjin could be said to be extremely lucky. Chu Xiu smiled faintly and said, "It's just luck." He wasn't being humble. He was really lucky. Xinyuan Wushuang's strength was not that weak, and the Battle Soul technique was not his only trump card. However, he was so unlucky that he chose to use the Battle Soul technique and attracted the mark left by Marquis Lu Wenho, which was simply a chance for Chu Xiu. Otherwise, Chu Xiu would not have won so easily, even though he was confident that he would not be defeated if he had fought in a different way. What happened next was simple. The High Heaven sect lost in this martial arts competition. Not only did they lose some natural treasures, but they also lost some conditions to the Imperial Sky Pavilion. As for what these conditions were, it was up to Zhong Qiushui and the others to negotiate. Even Lu Sanjin was not qualified to listen, let alone Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu stayed with the Imperial Sky Pavilion in High Heaven City for a few more days. When everything was settled, he followed Lu Sanjin and the others back to the headquarters of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Yin Lingzi said goodbye to them and continued to travel around the Daluotian continent. Like the High Heaven sect, the Imperial Sky Pavilion had a giant city of its own. This seemed to be the habit of these sects when they first came to the Daluotian continent. At that time, the Daluotian continent had not been exploited, so there were fierce beasts everywhere. Building such a giant city could also protect some young cultivators. Compared with High Heaven City, the giant city where the headquarters of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was located was much more ordinary, but only in comparison to High Heaven City. In fact, the Imperial Sky Pavilion was built on the top of a mountain that was thousands of meters high, and there was only a nearly vertical mountain road leading to the top. The giant city on the top of the mountain was also very eye-catching, and it could even be seen from dozens of kilometers away. When Chu Xiu and others arrived at the gate of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, someone was already waiting to greet them. It was the pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, Heavenly King Li Wuxiang. Li Wuxiang was worthy of his title. He was tall and mighty, and his face was dignified and solemn. Just by looking at him, he gave off a very dignified feeling. When Li Wuxiang saw that Lu Sanjin and the others had returned, a smile appeared on his face. He said, "Very good. You guys did pretty well this time. Our Imperial Sky Pavilion has lost 3 consecutive martial arts demonstrations. We've finally won this round." Although Lu Sanjin had performed well in the last martial arts demonstration, the other 2 disciples of the Imperial Sky Pavilion did not perform well. The previous 2 times were even worse. At that time, Lu Sanjin had not yet risen, and the Imperial Sky Pavilion was almost beaten by High Heaven sect. Zhong Qiushui just walked over and said lightly, "Pavilion Master, the conditions of High Heaven sect have been discussed. They are quite efficient and did not shirk their responsibilities." Li Wuxiang nodded and said, "That's good." Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes. The relationship between the Pavilion Master and Deputy Pavilion Master was very delicate. It was said that Li Wuxiang and Zhong Qiushui had a very good relationship before. They were the 2 heroes of the Imperial Sky Pavilion, and they were like brothers. In the end, a dispute over the position of Pavilion Master had escalated to this point. Of course, Chu Xiu was just watching the show and did not plan to delve too deeply into it. At this time, Li Wuxiang also looked at Chu Xiu and said with a smile, "You must be Chu, right? Chu represented my Imperial Sky Pavilion in winning the martial arts demonstration this time and can be said to be the greatest contributor to my Imperial Sky Pavilion. At the banquet, my Imperial Sky Pavilion will also reward you handsomely." Li Wuxiang's attitude was very good. He was courteous but did not lose his dignity, but Chu Xiu could see a bit of inquisitiveness in his eyes. This was all normal, so Chu Xiu did not care. He just cupped his fists and said, "Since I have become an honored guest of Imperial Sky Pavilion, it is natural for me to take the money and work hard." Li Wuxiang gave Chu Xiu a few more words of encouragement before going off to greet the others. The banquet in the evening was actually just that. Although it was nominally a welcoming dinner for Lu Sanjin and the others, the atmosphere was very awkward. Zhong Qiushui, the deputy pavilion master, was in charge of leading the team to participate in the martial arts demonstration, but his attitude was very cold. Moreover, Zhong Qiushui was not without a foundation in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Although he had a cold personality, he treated his own people very well. He was very generous, and when he gave pointers to his subordinates or disciples, he never hid anything. So even though he wasn't the pavilion master, there were many people who were willing to follow him. These people and Li Wuxiang, the pavilion master's people, were on opposite sides. The entire scene was as awkward as one could imagine. Chu Xiu did not mind. He was only concerned about the promise Lu Sanjin made to him, which was to bring him to meet the Imperial Sky Pavilion's old pavilion master and ask him about Dugu Weiwei. Lu Sanjin was quite reliable. The next morning he came to look for Chu Xiu and said that he had already spoken to the old pavilion master and that Chu Xiu could ask him any time. Seeing Lu Sanjin's rather excited expression, Chu Xiu asked, "Brother Lu, are you very close to the old pavilion master?" Lu Sanjin nodded and said, "Everyone in the Imperial Sky Pavilion thinks that I'm the pavilion master's man, but in fact, I'm the old pavilion master's man. Although I don't like Xinyuan Wushuang, I have to admit that he's indeed more talented than me. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's 100 times more talented than me. In the past, I was just an ordinary disciple in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It's all thanks to the old pavilion master who picked me out and gave me a chance that I'm in this position today. The pavilion master trusts me because he knows how I feel about the old pavilion master. The reason I'm helping the pavilion master wholeheartedly is also because he was chosen by the old pavilion master." These things were not secrets in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore Lu Sanjin spoke about them directly. He was the one who invited Chu Xiu to the Imperial Sky Pavilion as a foreign advisor. Naturally, there was no need for him to hide these things. The old pavilion master's secluded residence was on a cliff in the corner of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Perhaps old people did not like things that were too luxurious. Chu Xiu had been to the old celestial master's thatched cottage. It was very ordinary. The old pavilion master's secluded residence was also an ordinary quadrangle of a farmer's house. However, it was next to a cliff. "Old pavilion master, I've brought him here," Lu Sanjin said as he pushed open the door of the quadrangle. He seemed very casual. Inside the courtyard house, an old man with white hair and a sackcloth robe was sitting on a recliner, reading a book. When he saw the two of them enter, he waved his hand, and without the slightest bit of stellar energy leaked out, the breeze seemed to have a mind of its own as it carried two praying mats to their feet. The old pavilion master smiled and said, "You're here. Take a seat." Chu Xiu cupped his hands together and said, "Greetings, old pavilion master." The old pavilion master nodded. He looked at Chu Xiu and said, "Not bad, not bad. I've met Xinyuan Wushuang once. Although he's extremely arrogant, he's indeed a genius. It's not easy for you to defeat him. The ancestor of your line should be proud of you." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "However, my master has an obsession and so do I. If I don't defeat the successor of my enemy, I won't even be able to tell the name of my line to others. It's a disgrace." Chu Xiu had gone to great lengths to meet the old pavilion master for this matter. Therefore he did not beat around the bush and asked directly. The old pavilion master of the Imperial Sky Pavilion was already over 500 years old. He was also an expert in the martial immortal realm. He was someone who stood at the peak of the Daluotian realm. If even the old pavilion master did not know anything about Dugu Weiwei, Chu Xiu would really be at a loss. Chapter 11-13. The old pavilion master looked at Chu Xiu with a complicated look in his murky eyes. Of course, this complicated look was not because of Chu Xiu, but because of the contents of his own memories. Sighing, the old pavilion master shook his head and said, "Although I can't guess who the founder of your lineage is, you people have been cultivating in the mountains and forests every day. Your brains have become stiff from all the cultivation. Why are you so stubborn? If Sanjin hadn't agreed to your request, I really wouldn't want to recall those things. Dugu Weiwei. I've roamed the Daluotian for my entire life, but I really don't want to mention that name." Chu Xiu's heart trembled when he heard the old pavilion master's words. As expected, the old pavilion master knew of Dugu Weiwei's existence. The old pavilion master's eyes were filled with a hint of reminiscence as he said, 500 years ago, although I was still young, I was considered an elite disciple in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. It was at that time that Dugu Weiwa appeared. No one knew where he came from and no one knew why he was so powerful. After that, we speculated that he might have come from the ancestral lands. The old pavilion master paused for a moment when he mentioned the ancestral lands, but he didn't explain much. Instead, he quickly said, when he appeared, he was still fighting with someone and caused a huge commotion. However, we didn't manage to find the other person who fought with him. The old pavilion master smiled bitterly and said, I wasn't qualified to participate in that battle at all. I was sent by the Imperial Sky Pavilion to seal off the Dilua mountain range. Actually, the reason why the battle started was because the people on our side were too impulsive. Their tone was a little too intense. And that Dugu Weiwei's personality was extremely domineering. He killed the person who spoke rudely the moment he arrived. Both sides immediately started fighting. The old pavilion master's eyes were filled with fear as he recalled those events. He pointed to himself and said, I have now reached the martial immortal realm. However, to the me from back then, martial immortal level experts were no different from immortals. Yet, before that man, I was akin to an ordinary mortal, and was sliced in two by a single slash. That scene was simply capable of driving one insane. The Eastern region's cultivators could no longer hold on. They used their trump cards and forced the Eastern region's cultivators back to the Northern region. The profound heaven realm and the other major forces of the Northern domain acted in time, but they still couldn't stop the enemy. In the end, the top factions of the Western and Southern regions also joined in. Alright, there were also some primordial sovereigns like you who live in seclusion in the mountains. I just don't know if your bloodline fought with Dugu Weiwei when he first appeared in the Eastern region, or if you joined later. However, it's already not easy for your ancestor to survive after exchanging blows with him. He had single-handedly stirred up the entire Daluotian nation, practically making the entire world his enemy. The whole process sounds long, but in fact it only took less than 10 days. Therefore, apart from the top sects, most people in the world don't know what happened. In the end, everyone used all their trump cards and paid an unimaginable price before we finally won. It was a Pyrrhic victory. At this point, the old pavilion master closed his eyes slightly, obviously not wanting to recall the tragedy of that battle. Lu Sanjin's mouth was agape, his face filled with shock. Even he had never heard of such a thing. Who would have thought that such a terrifying expert would appear among the Daluotian people 500 years ago? What kind of cultivation was that? A reincarnated demon god? Chu Xiu digested these words in his heart. In truth, he felt that the inexplicable fierce battle between Dugu Weiwei and the Daluotian forces was quite normal. For the sects of the celestial absolute plane, they had been staying at home, cultivating themselves and teaching their female disciples. Suddenly, such a formidable wave of energy fluctuations erupted. Not to mention there was also the appearance of an unknown expert. Naturally, they would have to step forward and question the matter. They were all leaders of sects and sections. Everyone had their own personalities. It was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't have a fiery temper. But unfortunately, the person they were facing was Dugu Weiwei. What kind of existence was Dugu Weiwei in the lower realm? The supreme demon lord who decided the life and death of millions with a single word. With his power alone, he dominated the entire world. Other than Ning Xuanji who could compete with him. Such an existence could only be looked up to. How could he be questioned? Even in the lower realm, there was no one who dared to question him. Therefore, it was normal for Dugu Weiwei to kill that expert with a single slash. Both sides could be said to have done nothing wrong. However, when they encountered each other, a bloody battle was naturally inevitable. Seeing that the old pavilion master didn't speak for a long time, Chu Xiu couldn't help but ask, what happened next? Is Dugu Weiwei dead? Chu Xiu had always suspected that he was the reincarnation of Dugu Weiwei. If Dugu Weiwei was really dead, then this was more or less confirmed. This was also what Chu Xiu wanted to know the most. No matter who he was, whether he was Dugu Weiwei or Lin Yi, he was now Chu Xiu. This was what Chu Xiu had always believed. Therefore he also wanted an accurate answer. The old pavilion master asked in return, is your lineage trying to avenge the humiliation by defeating Dugu Weiwei's successor? Chu Xiu nodded and said, anyway, that's what my master said. The old pavilion master shook his head and said, then when you go back, you should first persuade your master to let it go because it's already impossible. Dugu Weiwei isn't dead, he's just sealed. He doesn't have a successor at least for the next 500 years. Hearing that the old pavilion master said that Dugu Weiwei wasn't dead, Chushio didn't know why, but he actually heaved a sigh of relief. If Dugu Weiwei wasn't dead, then there was naturally no such thing as reincarnation. However, this raised another question. If he wasn't the reincarnation of Dugu Weiwei, then who was he? Chushio forcefully suppressed the throbbing in his heart and asked in a deep voice, "Since you concealed Dugu Weiwei, why didn't you kill him? Isn't it good to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots once and for all?" The old pavilion master smiled bitterly and said, "It's not that we can't kill him, we just don't dare to. Dugu Weiwei's various secret techniques are simply peerless. It's as if he can't be killed." Even though his physical body was refined into ashes by the 10,000 Buddha's light sect formation by the Sanskrit sect and the heavenly Luo treasure Rakshasa, his true spirit is still indestructible. He forcibly took over the body of a martial immortal from the Bliss Demon Palace and instantly turned it into his own body. With such a terrifying physical body, no one can be certain what's so special about his primordial spirit. Thus, if we kill him, everyone will think he's dead. However, if he were to use some sort of strange method to come back to life, it will be another calamity for our Daluotian race. Thus, the various sects discussed and decided to use their strongest methods to seal his physical body and primordial spirit. They were planning to forcibly exhaust his lifespan. However, 500 years have passed. Even most martial immortals can't last until now. As far as I know, only a few of the martial immortals who participated in that battle are still alive. In fact, there aren't many people like me who aren't even qualified to participate in the battle. Chushio nodded lightly. As long as the demonic core was not destroyed, the true spirit would not die. The people from Exalted Celestial weren't doing anything wrong. With the undying demonic core, Dugu Weiwei was indeed a near-undying existence. Killing him would be even more troublesome. In that case, where is Dugu Weiwei sealed now? In the Lingxiao city that you've been to before, the old pavilion master said. Chushio was stunned. He never thought he would be so close to Dugu Weiwei. The old pavilion master explained, "Originally, according to our original plan, Dugu Weiwei should be sealed in the Exalted Divine Palace. However, the Exalted Divine Palace is too important to our Daluotian race, and there can be no room for error. So, after some discussion, we decided to seal Dugu Weiwei in the most important cultivation paradise of High Heaven Sect, the Spirit Heaven Realm. The myriad heavenly sources grand array in High Heaven Sect is extremely powerful, but every time it is activated, it consumes an astonishing amount of materials. Since High Heaven Sect opened it once during the Great Ancient Tribulation, it has not been used in the last 10,000 years. Of course, the materials needed to activate the spirit array were gathered by the various great forces for High Heaven Sect. At this point, the old pavilion master snorted lightly and said, "But I dare conclude that High Heaven Sect absolutely does not need so many materials. They must have embezzled a lot of them." Chushio ignored the old pavilion master's indignation. He just felt that the situation was a little tricky. If it were any other place, Chushio could still think of a way, sneak in or use other methods. As long as he could meet Dugu Weiwei and ask him about it, it would be fine. But who would have thought that Dugu Weiwei would actually be locked up in High Heaven Sect? This was a little troublesome. During the martial arts exhibition, Chushio had severely injured Xinyuan Wushuang. Although High Heaven Sect could afford to lose, and Qin Baiyuan had publicly announced that High Heaven Sect had lost, it was conceivable what kind of attitude High Heaven Sect would have towards him. Not to mention letting Chushio enter their cultivation paradise. Even if Chushio entered High Heaven City the next time, it was estimated that they would not have a good attitude. While Chushio was lost in thought, the old pavilion master said, "Now that the matter is clear, how are you going to go back and reply to your master?" Chushio smiled bitterly and said, "I can only tell the truth. But this time, I stepped out into the world not only to avenge Yishua's humiliation, but also to temper my heart in the secular world. Therefore, I plan to stay in the world for a few years before going back and explaining everything to Master." The old pavilion master snorted and said, "To put it bluntly, you prime sovereigns are very pretentious. Back then, blood flowed like a river under the hands of that person. Who knows how many experts died? It's already good enough that your ancestral master survived, yet you still want revenge? But I can give you an idea so that you can explain yourself when you return to the sect. At the very least, you will have a way out of this embarrassing situation so that you can openly reveal your name." "What idea?" The old pavilion master said, "During the battle, that person's weapon was injured by the experts of the sword sect under the heavens at the price of shattering the supreme treasure, the Through Heaven sword. It should have fallen in the southern part of the eastern region, near the southern wilderness. Because of the chaos of war at that time, no one went to look for it. Until recently, my Imperial Sky Pavilion heard some rumors that that person's weapon appeared in the hands of some barbarian tribes in the southern region. If you can bring that person's weapon back, it will be considered as giving an explanation to the ancestral master. Is this enough of a way out of this embarrassing situation? Chapter 11:14. The old pavilion master's words stunned Chu Xiu. The weapon he was talking about should be listened to spring rain, but it was actually damaged? That was a supreme demonic armament created by the heavens and the earth, and it had been nourished by Dugu Weiwa's own power for a very long time. It was definitely stronger than the broken formation in Chu Xiu's hands. Yet it had actually been damaged. From this, one could well imagine how intense that battle had been. However, at this time, Chu Xiu also understood the old pavilion master's meaning. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Old pavilion master wants me to go to South China?" Lu Sanjin wanted to say something but was stopped by the old pavilion master with a wave of his hand. He looked at Chu Xiu and said directly, "Yes, that's what I mean. In fact, if you're an ordinary guest, His Excellency Emperor Sky can directly order you to go. However, you're Sanjin's good friend and Gu Zun's successor. I don't want to deceive you, so I'm telling you this. For the Emperor Sky Pavilion, the situation in South China is a bit tricky, and we can't find anyone to deal with it for the time being. Your strength and identity can. However, although it's tricky, I didn't lie to you when I told you that that person's weapon had appeared in the hands of those barbarians. Moreover, you're going to the southern barbaric land as my Emperor Sky Pavilion's guest, so the benefits that you deserve will not be reduced." Chu Xiu didn't ask what was so troublesome about the southern barbaric land. He merely rubbed his chin and asked, "Although the Emperor Sky Pavilion doesn't dominate the eastern region, it's still a top-notch sect in the eastern region. Is it lacking people now?" The old pavilion master smiled bitterly. "Lacking, we've always been lacking. You're an Imperial Sky Pavilion guest, and you're representing the Emperor Sky Pavilion to participate in the martial arts exhibition. You should understand the gap between our Emperor Sky Pavilion and High Heaven sect. In the past few hundred years, our Emperor Sky Pavilion has always been in a state of shortage. Even among the younger generation, Sanjin is the only capable one. 10,000 years ago, the territory controlled by the Emperor Sky Pavilion was about this big. Even now it's still this big, but its power has declined. Of course, we don't have enough people. Since you appeared in Fanglin County, you should have seen Jiangzong. That kid was also promoted by me when I was still in power. Although he is a little overly cautious, he has both strength and ability. He kept complaining to me and wanted to be transferred back to the Imperial Heaven Pavilion. He said that it was enough to leave a true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist in Fanglin County. His thinking was still too simple. What did Fanglin rely on to be so peaceful? He relied on his heaven and earth mystic enlightening cultivation base and the Imperial Sky Pavilion's influence. The sky was high and the Emperor was far away. Strength would always be ranked before prestige. If we really send a martial artist of the true fire spirit refinement realm, he might be easily taken over by those sections. Beside him, Lu Sanjin's expression was a little strange. Previously, Fanglin province was peaceful. However, ever since Chu Xiu's suggestion to Jiangzong, it might not be peaceful anymore. Chu Xiu pondered for a moment and nodded. "No problem. I'll go to the southern barbaric lands." The old pavilion master waved his hand and said resolutely, "All right then. You'll be the county governor of Kangwu County, which is near the southern barbaric lands. I'll get Li Wuxiang to inform all the martial artists of the Imperial Sky Pavilion after that." Chu Xiu nodded. Just as he was about to leave, he thought of something and asked, "What about the previous county governor of Kangwu County? If I were to take over his position and offend someone, it would be an undeserved calamity." The old pavilion master looked deeply at Chu Xiu and said, "You don't have to worry about that. The previous county governor of Kangwu County is already dead." Chu Xiu choked for a moment but did not say much. He left the small courtyard with Lu Sanjin. Chu Xiu did not care about the rewards that the Imperial Sky Pavilion had promised him. He did not lack these things now. The thing that really attracted Chu Xiu was Ting Chunyu. Although Chu Xiu already had the formation breaking technique that came from the same source as Ting Chunyu, if Ting Chunyu could fuse with the formation breaking technique, it would improve the trump card in Chu Xiu's hands. Seeing the backs of Chu Xiu and Lu Sanjin walking out, the old pavilion master smiled bitterly. Since when did the Imperial Sky Pavilion fall to the point of scheming against a young man? However, he was helpless because the Imperial Sky Pavilion really had no one else they could use. Chu Xiu had the strength to defeat Shenyuan Wushuang, which proved that he had the strength comparable to an expert in the heaven and earth profound enlightenment realm. Moreover, he was Gu Zun's successor. Although some big sects might not pay much attention to this identity, it also represented Chu Xiu's background. No matter what, Gu Zun's successor always had an expert in the martial immortal realm as his backer. Therefore, it was actually suitable to send Chu Xiu. The old pavilion master had already thought of this idea after Lu Sanjin told him that Chu Xiu wanted to see him yesterday to inquire about Dugu Weiwei. That was why he spoke to Chu Xiu so quickly, as if he had already prepared a draft. However, he did not know that the things he mentioned were exactly what Chu Xiu needed. After walking out of the small courtyard, Lu Sanjin said to Chu Xiu apologetically, "Brother Chu, I'm sorry. I didn't know the old pavilion master would say this to you." Although he, Lu Sanjin, was not a straightforward person, he would not do such a thing to scheme against his own people. Although he and Chu Xiu were not best friends, at least they were on the same side. It was somewhat inappropriate to do this. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "There's no need to do this. The old pavilion master's idea is good. If we take back that person's weapon, we will be able to answer to the ancestral master. I agree to this matter, and it has nothing to do with Brother Lu or the old pavilion master. To put it bluntly, if I don't want to, even the Imperial Sky Pavilion can't force me." Lu Sanjin nodded. Chu Xiu was right. Although he was a foreign elder, he was still a successor of Primordial Venerate. The Imperial Sky Pavilion could use him, but they could not make use of him. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to offending a martial immortal. By the way, what's so tricky about Nanman? It seems that you don't recommend me to go. Lu Sanjin smiled bitterly. This elder brother was really open-minded. He only started to ask after agreeing to it. It's hard to explain in a short time. I'll take you to a place first. As he spoke, Lu Sanjin pulled Chu Xiu to a side hall in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. There was a huge sand table in the hall. The area built on it was the territory controlled by the Imperial Sky Pavilion, the entire eastern region, and the places connected to it. Lu Sanjin said, "This was built when the Imperial Sky Pavilion first entered the Daluotian territory. Every time we conquer a place, we start to build a sand table and restore the terrain and so on here. The Kangwu County that you're going to is located at the border between the eastern and southern regions. It's also the southernmost part of the Dilua mountain range in the eastern region. It's filled with mountains and dense forests, and it has the most ferocious beasts. There are also many barbarian tribes there. By the way, you should know about the barbarian tribes, right?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I don't know." Lu Sanjin smacked his head and said, "You bunch of primeval venerables are really impressive. You only know how to cultivate all day long. No wonder your cultivation base is so strong." It was hard to tell if he was mocking or praising. Then he explained to Chu Xiu, "Speaking of these barbarians, we're the ones who have let them down. You can say that they're the indigenous people of the Daluotian territory. Many cultivators who have never been to the southern region or the depths of the Dilua mountain range have always thought that there were no Daluotian people in the beginning. Actually, they're wrong. Humans are the most intelligent of all creatures. There are so many ferocious beasts in the Daluotian territory. Naturally, there are also humans. However, after we entered the Daluotian territory, not only did we start killing ferocious beasts, but we also killed many of these barbarians. Our living space was compressed to the extreme. It's a little unethical to do such a thing, so we didn't publicize it. If you know about it, you know about it. If you don't know about it, it's better if you don't." Lu Sanjin scratched his head. He still had a sense of shame. After all, what his ancestors had done in the past was no different from bandits. Lu Sanjin pointed at the barbarian territory and said, "Now, most of the barbarians live in the southern region as well as in the undeveloped depths of the Dilua mountain range. Your Kangwu County is right next to that place." At this time, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Why not kill all of these barbarians?" Lu Sanjin laughed bitterly and said, "There are many reasons. One of them is that these barbarians are not powerless to fight back. They still have some strength. Their martial arts are very strange. To be more accurate, they shouldn't be called martial arts. There are all kinds of witchcraft and secret techniques. They're very difficult to deal with. If we were to forcefully exterminate them, even if all the Daluotian forces join forces, they would inevitably suffer some losses. Also, the Daluotian territory is vast. Even after tens of thousands of years of development, This territory is enough for us to use. There's no need to force these barbarians into desperation. The last reason is that some sects are hypocritically saying that killing too much is harmful to the harmony of the heavens. They're against this kind of killing. At this point, Lu Sanjin said disdainfully, the ones who say the most are the monks from the western region. When they first came to the Daluotian territory, they killed many barbarians as well. In fact, they were the ones who killed the most. Because those barbarians worshipped all kinds of messy gods, they were condemned as heretics by the monks and exterminated immediately. Just because they found an excuse to kill, they think they're merciful? Do they think they're saints? I can't stand this. Lu Sanjin seemed to have a strong opinion of the monks from the western region. After cursing them for a while, he said to Chu Xiu, therefore, the most troublesome thing for the Kangwu County governor is to deal with these barbarians. They don't care if you're from the Imperial Sky Pavilion or anyone else. In their eyes, you're a foreign race that deserves to be killed. It's impossible for you to be as carefree as Jiangzong. Another troublesome thing about Kangwu County is that it's next to Cold River City. Cold River City has just risen. As a force that doesn't have an ancient legacy, Cold River City's territory is the smallest. They're also the most aggressive. It's not the first time they've had conflicts with the Imperial Sky Pavilion. The previous county governor died during the Southern Barbarians' riot. He was plotted against badly. However, to be honest, although those one-track-minded barbarians have strange methods, they shouldn't be able to kill the county governor who used to be an elder in the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Therefore, the Imperial Sky Pavilion suspects that Cold River City was behind that incident. However, although we suspect it, we don't have any evidence. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.